Hey, welcome back. I've got some fresh stories lined up for you today. Let me know what time it is where you are, and let's jump right into the first one.
Story 1. I was the only person who cared for my wife's sick father in his final days. After my wife and her sisters dumped him and left at his will reading, my wife and her sisters got his multi-million business. I got the rundown farmhouse. My wife mocked me. Should have taken better care of him. Then the lawyer said, actually. My wife went white at what came next. Look, I'm not saying my wife's family is heartless, but when my father-in-law, Richard Hawthorne, got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, they disappeared faster than my paycheck after bills are due. I mean, we're talking Olympic-level ghosting here. Usain Bolt couldn't have bolted that quick. My wife Melissa, bless her designer handbag-loving heart, sat me down in our kitchen the day after Richard's doctor delivered the news and said with a completely straight face, "Travis, I just can't handle hospitals emotionally. The smell of antiseptic makes me nauseous, and watching someone deteriorate is too traumatic for my mental health." She said this while scrolling through Instagram, double-tapping photos of someone's vacation in Santorini. Real broken up about it. You know, her therapist had apparently greenlit this level of avoidance, which I'm pretty sure isn't how therapy is supposed to work. But hey, I'm just the guy who married into this circus. Her sisters were even better. Tiffany, the middle child who works in brand consulting, which as far as I can tell means she takes selfies and calls it market research, suddenly discovered an urgent work trip to Austin that absolutely could not be rescheduled. It's a major client, Travis. She explained over speakerphone, her voice dripping with fake regret. They're launching a new athleisure line. And I'm the only one who understands their vision, right? Because what dying father wouldn't understand that yoga pants wait for no man? Lauren, the youngest and definitely the most dramatic, claimed she had to go to Seattle for 6 months for a digital nomad intensive retreat that cost more than my truck. When I asked what exactly you intensively retreat from for half a year, she got all huffy and said I wouldn't understand the millennial struggle for authentic self-discovery. She's 34. The millennial excuse is getting pretty worn out. Lauren, so that left me. Travis Donovan, the son-in-law everyone had spent the last 8 years calling Mr. Average at family gatherings, usually right before asking if I could fix their garbage disposal or hang some shelves. I'm a contractor, which in the Hawthorne family hierarchy ranks somewhere between the gardener and that weird cousin nobody invites to weddings. Richard himself had spent years introducing me as the handyman with no ambition. Usually, while wearing a smirk that suggested he found my entire existence mildly amusing at best. But here's the thing about people vanishing. When stuff gets real, somebody's got to stay. And apparently that somebody was me. The first week was brutal, not going to lie. Richard had moved into hospice care at his massive house in the suburbs, the kind of place with more bathrooms than I have friends. The nurses would come by twice a day, but the rest of the time, that was all me, baby. Feeding him soup that he'd complained tasted like dishwater that gave up on life. Helping him to the bathroom, which let me tell you, does wonders for any illusions you had about dignity. Adjusting his oxygen tanks while he barked orders like a retired general who'd never quite accepted retirement. Not that tube, the other one. He'd wheeze. Did you even read the manual or are you just winging it like you wing everything else? I'm winging it with style, Richard. I'd shoot back. That's the Travis Donovan guarantee. He'd grunt, which I learned was his version of a laugh. The house felt like a mausoleum most days. 2,300 square feet of marble floors and uncomfortable furniture that looked expensive, but felt like sitting on decorative rocks. Melissa would call maybe twice a week, always during her lunch break, always sounding distracted. "How's Dad doing?" she'd ask. And before I could answer with anything more detailed than fine, she'd already be moving on to tell me about some drama at her Pilates class or how her Tesla needed charging. But then something weird started happening around week 3. Richard stopped being such a colossal pain in my ass. We'd watch old westerns together on his ridiculously oversized TV, the kind where John Wayne looked like he could step right out of the screen and ask for a beer. Richard knew every line from The Searchers and would whisper them along with the actors, his voice raspy but determined. During commercial breaks, he'd tell me stories about growing up poor in Oklahoma, about building his textile company from nothing, about mistakes he'd made and people he trusted who didn't deserve it. "My daughters," he said one night, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "I gave them everything. Private schools, cars, college funds that could have bought small islands. You know what they learned? How to spend it." I offered. He actually smiled at that. "How to expect it. There's a difference, Travis. A big one." I brought him butterscotch pudding that night because the nurses said he needed more calories and he'd complained it tasted like sweetened regret, which honestly wasn't wrong, but he ate it anyway. And we sat in comfortable silence watching Clint Eastwood squint at people for justice. The nurses, Deborah and Patricia, started calling me the good son, which made me laugh because I wasn't even a real son, just the disposable son-in-law who'd drawn the short straw. Deborah, a no-nonsense woman from Jamaica with arms that could probably bench press me, told me one afternoon while checking Richard's vitals. Most families, they run away from death like it's contagious. But you show up every day. That man notices. Trust me, honey, he notices everything. Richard's neighbor, an elderly widower named Frank, who still mowed his own lawn at 83, would wave at me when I'd arrive each morning. "You're doing a good thing, son." He'd call out. Most people these days don't know what loyalty looks like anymore. I'd wave back, wondering if loyalty was the right word or if I was just too stubborn to abandon someone everybody else had written off. Sometimes late at night when the morphine made Richard chatty and philosophical, he'd grab my wrist with surprising strength for a dying man and look at me with eyes that were still sharp despite everything. "You're the only one who shows up, kid," he'd say. His voice barely above a whisper. "Remember that? You're the only damn one." I'd nod, uncomfortable with the intensity of it, figuring it was just the drugs talking. Old man getting sentimental as the end approached. We all cope differently, right? But here's what I didn't know then. Sitting in that oversized house, watching a millionaire slowly fade away while his actual family sent occasional thoughts and prayers texts. Richard Hawthorne wasn't the kind of man who said things he didn't mean, medicated or not. And he definitely wasn't the kind of man who forgot who showed up when it mattered and who didn't. Turns out the old man had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. And I was about to become his checkmate. Richard died on a Thursday morning at 6:47 a.m. right when I was in his kitchen microwaving chicken noodle soup because he'd complained the night before that everything tasted like cardboard. And Campbell was apparently the only thing that still had a soul. I heard the monitor alarm from upstairs, that long flat beep that sounds exactly like what you'd imagine the end sounds like. And I knew before I even climbed those stairs that the old man was gone. Deborah, the night nurse, was already there checking for a pulse she knew she wouldn't find. Her face professional but sad. "He went peacefully," she told me, her hand on my shoulder in his sleep. "That's a blessing, honey." I nodded, staring at Richard's face, which looked weirdly younger without all that pain carved into it. He looked like he'd finally won an argument nobody else knew he was having. I called Melissa at 7:02 a.m. 15 minutes felt like the appropriate amount of time to sit with death before dealing with the living, you know. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up, her voice thick with sleep and irritation. "Travis, it's 700 in the morning. What's wrong?" "Your dad passed away," I said quietly about 20 minutes ago peacefully in his sleep. There was a pause. Not the kind of pause where someone's processing grief or shock. More like the pause you take when you're calculating something. Then she said, and I swear on everything I own this is verbatim. "Oh, okay. I'll call Tiffany and Lauren. We need to get ready because this means the company's ours now." Not, "Oh my God." Not, "I'll be right there." Not even a single sob or sharp intake of breath. Just immediate business mode. Like her father's death was an email notification about a stock dividend. "Melissa," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Your dad just died. Maybe we could have I don't know, 5 minutes of being human before we talk about corporate structure." "Don't be dramatic, Travis." She snapped suddenly wide awake. "This is how adult business families handle things. We grieve, yes, but we also have to think practically. Dad would have wanted us to be smart about this, right? Richard would have definitely wanted his death to be treated like a hostile takeover opportunity. Totally his vibe." She arrived 2 hours later in a black Chanel suit that looked suspiciously fresh off the rack. Her makeup perfect, her hair blown out like she was attending a red carpet event for grief. Tiffany and Lauren showed up within the hour. Both of them wearing designer sunglasses indoors like they were celebrities dodging paparazzi instead of daughters who'd ignored their father for 6 months while he rotted away. They hugged each other in the foyer. This weird group hug that looked rehearsed. And I swear I heard Tiffany whisper "finally free." Lauren was already on her phone probably texting her followers about this difficult time with some filtered selfie where she looked beautifully tragic. The funeral planning was something else entirely. We're talking Shark Tank funeral edition, except the product being pitched was their fake grief, and the investors were anyone who might judge them for being terrible daughters. Melissa took charge immediately, booking the most expensive funeral home in the county, the kind of place with fountains in the lobby, and staff who spoke in hushed tones like they were working at a luxury spa for the dead. "We need it to reflect Dad's status," Melissa announced at the planning meeting. Sitting across from a funeral director named Craig who had the kind of beard that screamed, "I take our Teasel coffee very seriously." He was a pillar of the business community. "This needs to be memorable. Memorable like he was or memorable like a LinkedIn post, I muttered. But nobody heard me because Tiffany was already debating flower arrangements like she was competing on a reality show. White roses are so predictable, Tiffany said, flipping through a catalog. What about orchids? They're more sophisticated, more dad. Lauren looked up from her phone. Can we do a digital memorial wall where people can post photos like interactive? I could live stream parts of it for people who can't make it. I stared at her. You want to live stream your father's funeral? It's called being inclusive, Travis. She shot back. Not everyone can travel. This way, his legacy reaches more people. It's what the modern grieving process looks like. The modern grieving process apparently also included Tiffany wearing a white suit to the funeral because, as she explained to anyone who'd listen, white is a symbol of purity and new beginnings in many cultures. I read about it in a Goop article. It felt right. She looked like she was either attending a very confused wedding or auditioning for a cult. I half expected her to start handing out cleansing crystals. The funeral itself was held on a Saturday at St. Michael's Episcopal Church, a gorgeous old building with stained glass, and enough wood paneling to make a lumberjack weep. About 200 people showed up, mostly business associates, country club friends, and people who probably owed Richard money at some point. Frank, the neighbor, sat in the back pew and gave me a knowing nod when our eyes met. Melissa gave the eulogy, walking up to the podium in heels so high I'm pretty sure they violated several physics laws. She cleared her throat, looked out at the crowd with practiced emotion, and began. My father was a complicated man. I almost laughed out loud. Complicated man is universal code for we barely spoke, but I need to sound deep and introspective right now. It's the eulogy equivalent of it's not you, it's me, she continued, her voice wavering in all the right places. He taught us the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the meaning of perseverance. 3 things she'd actively ignored her entire adult life. But sure, let's go with that narrative. He built an empire from nothing, and his legacy will live on through all of us who loved him. Tiffany dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue. Lauren was absolutely filming this on her phone. I could see the red recording light from where I sat 3 rows back. Someone's Instagram stories were about to get very morbid. When it was over, people lined up to offer condolences, shaking hands with the daughters like they'd just survived a natural disaster instead of a carefully orchestrated performance. I stood off to the side near Richard's coffin, this obscenely expensive mahogany number with gold handles that probably cost more than my yearly salary. I looked down at him, peaceful in his final suit, and remembered our last real conversation 3 days before he died. He'd grabbed my hand, his grip weak but determined, and said, "They're going to act like they loved me, Travis. They're going to cry pretty tears and say pretty words. Don't believe a damn second of it. You know who I really was. You're the only one who stayed when staying was hard." I told him to save his strength, that he shouldn't worry about any of this. But he'd shaken his head, adamant. "I'm not worried, kid. I'm prepared." Big difference. Standing there at his funeral, watching his daughters work the room like it was a networking event. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. It wasn't exactly sadness, though there was grief mixed in there somewhere. It was more like anticipation, like waiting for a punchline you know is coming but can't quite predict. Richard Hawthorne had been a lot of things. Stubborn, judgmental, brutally honest, occasionally mean. But he'd never been stupid and he'd definitely never been careless. A man who'd built a multi-million-dollar empire from Oklahoma dirt didn't just die without having every last detail figured out. And something told me watching Melissa Eyre kiss someone from the garden club that Richard's final move was going to be his masterpiece. The old man always did love a good plot twist. 3 days after we buried Richard, we all assembled at the law offices of Henderson and Blay like we were gathering for the world's most passive-aggressive book club meeting. The office was located downtown in one of those buildings that screams, "We charge by the minute." And our water costs $8 a bottle. All glass and steel and uncomfortable modern furniture that looked like it was designed by someone who hated the human spine. The conference room on the 14th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A table so polished you could see your existential crisis reflected in it and that distinct smell that expensive places have. A mixture of leather, money, and the faint desperation of people trying to prove they belong there. There were bottles of fancy water nobody would drink, and a coffee station with one of those machines that sounds like it's launching a small spacecraft every time you press a button. Melissa strutted in like she was walking a runway, wearing a black Armani dress that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the confidence of someone who'd already mentally spent her inheritance 3 times over. She brought her Louis Vuitton tote bag, the one she called her power bag, which I'm pretty sure is just a regular bag that costs $4,000 and gives you an inflated sense of self-importance. Tiffany arrived 5 minutes later in head Toto Prada because apparently grief has a dress code and that code is aggressively expensive. She was carrying her iPad because she couldn't go 5 minutes without checking her brand metrics, which is what she calls obsessively monitoring how many people liked her latest post about green juice or manifesting abundance or whatever cult-adjacent wellness trend she's peddling this week. Lauren showed up last naturally wearing vintage Gucci and those ridiculous oversized sunglasses that make people look like fashionable insects. She immediately started setting up her phone on a little tripod because God forbid she experience a major life moment without documenting it for her 12,000 followers who definitely cared deeply about her inheritance drama. "Lauren, you cannot film this," Melissa hissed, her smile tight. "It's a legal proceeding." "It's my truth, Melissa," Lauren replied, not looking up from adjusting her ring light. "My followers have been on this journey with me. They deserve closure, too." "Your followers don't deserve," I said, dropping into a chair at the far end of the table. "They're strangers on the internet who watch you eat salads and complain about flight delays." She finally looked at me, her expression wounded in that performative way influencers have perfected. "You wouldn't understand the responsibility of having a platform, Travis." "You're right," I said. "I'm too busy living in reality to understand pretend responsibility." Mr. Henderson walked in before Lauren could fire back, saving us all from what I'm sure would have been a riveting debate about authentic engagement and algorithmic reach. Charles Henderson was about 65 with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of face that had seen every family fight imaginable and stopped being surprised by human awfulness sometime during the Reagan administration. He was carrying a leather folder that looked older than me and had the weight of someone about to referee a cage match disguised as estate planning. "Ladies, gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone lawyers use when they're professionally required to pretend everyone in the room is civilized. "Thank you for coming. I know this is a difficult time." Melissa literally couldn't help herself. "Let's just get to it, Charles. We're all adults here. We know why we're gathered, right? Adults. That's definitely the word I'd use for three women who'd abandoned their dying father and were now practically salivating over his money like it was the last Black Friday sale at Nordstrom." Mr. Henderson sat down, opened the folder with the reverence of someone handling a historical document and pulled out Richard's will. It was typed on fancy paper with an embossed letterhead because even in death, Richard Hawthorne wasn't doing anything halfway. The lawyer cleared his throat in that dramatic way they must teach in law school. Right between how to bill in 6-minute increments and making your voice sound ominous for effect. "The last will and testament of Richard James Hawthorne." He began, and I swear the room temperature dropped 5 degrees from the collective intensity of everyone's attention. "Written on March 15th of this year and witnessed by myself and my partner Gregory Blay." March 15th. The Ides of March. Of course, Richard had updated his will on the day Julius Caesar got stabbed. The man had a flair for symbolic timing. Henderson continued reading through the standard legal jargon that sounds like English, but isn't really all they heretofore and in perpetuity. Stuff that makes you wonder if lawyers are just messing with us. Then he got to the good part, his voice taking on that slow dramatic cadence that lawyers apparently love using for plot twists. "To my daughters, Melissa and Hawthorne Donovan, Tiffany Marie Hawthorne, and Lauren Elizabeth Hawthorne, I leave controlling shares of Hawthorne Textiles Incorporated to be divided equally among the three of them, valued at approximately $12.6 million. Melissa actually clapped. I'm not exaggerating. She brought her hands together in genuine applause like she'd just watched a kindergarten play and wanted to encourage the performers. The sound echoed in the conference room and for a second everyone just stared at her. "Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. This is wonderful news. Dad really did love us." Tiffany reached over and high-fived her. An actual high-five at a reading. I was witnessing the death of decorum in real time, and honestly, I was kind of impressed by the audacity. Lauren had her phone out typing furiously, probably crafting the perfect caption about legacy and family and gratitude that would accompany whatever filtered photo she'd post later. Something like, "Forever grateful for the lessons Daddy taught us about building empires and believing in family." With 17 emojis and a link to her Amazon storefront, Mr. Henderson waited for them to finish their celebration, his face carefully neutral in that way that suggested he'd seen this exact scenario play out 100 times with 100 different terrible families. Then he continued reading and his eyes flicked toward me for just a second. "And to my son-in-law, Travis Michael Donovan, I leave the family farmhouse and surrounding property at 82 Willow Creek Road, including all structures, land, and contents therein." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a designer handbag drop. Then Melissa snorted. Not a gentle laugh, but an actual snort-laugh combo that sounded like a pig questioning your life choices. "You got the dump, Trav," she said, barely containing her glee. The old falling apart farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Should have taken better care of him. Maybe you would have gotten something actually valuable. Tiffany joined in, giggling behind her hand. Oh my God, that place is a disaster. The roof leaks, the plumbing is from like the Civil War era, and I'm pretty sure there are raccoons living in the attic. Dad used to joke about tearing it down. At least you got something, Lauren added with fake sympathy, finally looking up from her phone. I mean, it's not $12 million in stock, but you could probably sell it for like what, 50 grand? Maybe 75 if you find someone really desperate. They were laughing now, all three of them, feeding off each other's cruelty like hyenas who just found wounded prey. Melissa was wiping tears from her eyes, her mascara smudging slightly. This is perfect. This is actually perfect. The handyman gets the handyman special. It's so poetic. I sat there absorbing their mockery, feeling my face get hot, but keeping my expression neutral. I'd learned a long time ago that the best response to the Hawthorne sisters when they got like this was to give them nothing. No reaction, no ammunition, just let them exhaust themselves on their own superiority complex. But Mr. Henderson wasn't laughing. In fact, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and what might have been respect. He cleared his throat loudly, professionally, cutting through their cackling like a judge's gavel. Actually, he said, his voice suddenly sharp enough to slice through their celebration like a hot knife through their designer egos. There's more. The laughter stopped immediately. All three sisters turned to look at him, their smiles faltering like someone had just announced the store was out of their favorite Roy flavor. What do you mean more? Melissa asked, her voice tight. Mr. Henderson reached into his folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. It was cream-colored, expensive-looking paper, and across the front in Richard's distinctive shaky handwriting was my name. Travis Michael Donovan. Your father requested that Travis read this privately, Henderson said, sliding the envelope across the Polish table toward me. It contains additional instructions regarding his bequest. I picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of it, the thickness suggesting multiple pages inside. Through the paper, I could feel something small and metal. A key maybe. Melissa's smile had completely vanished now, replaced by something harder, more calculating. What kind of additional instructions? Charles, we have a right to know what's in our father's will. You know everything that pertains to you, Henderson replied calmly. This is a private communication between Mr. Hawthorne and his son-in-law. Perfectly legal, I assure you. I pocketed the envelope, feeling all three sisters' eyes boring into me like laser beams of suspicion and barely contained rage. Melissa leaned toward me, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow sounded more threatening than if she'd yelled. Don't get too excited, Travis. It's probably instructions on how to maintain that piece of crap property. Or maybe the code to his antique tractor. Dad always did have a weird sense of humor about worthless things. I looked at her, really looked at her and smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small one, the kind that says, I know something you don't, and it's killing you. Yeah, I said quietly. Maybe it runs on karma. She didn't laugh. None of them did. And for the first time since Richard died, I felt something close to hope. I waited until I was in my truck before opening the envelope because there was no way in hell I was giving Melissa and her designer-clad vulture sisters the satisfaction of watching me read whatever Richard had left me. The parking garage under Henderson and Blaze building was one of those underground concrete mazes that smelled like oil and expensive regret. The kind of place where every sound echoes and makes you feel like you're in a movie about corporate espionage. My truck, a 2015 Ford F-150 that had seen better days and about 47 different construction sites, looked ridiculously out of place among the Teslas and BMWs, like a working-class hero at a yacht club mixer. I sat there in the driver's seat, engine off, just holding this envelope and feeling the weight of it. The paper was thick, the kind you buy from specialty stores where they ask if you want it hand-pressed or whatever pretentious thing makes paper cost $30 a sheet. Richard's handwriting on the front was shaky but deliberate. My name written with the careful precision of someone who knew these might be some of the last words he'd ever write. My hands were actually trembling a little as I broke the seal, which annoyed me because I'm not typically the trembling type. I build houses for a living. I use power tools that could remove fingers if you sneeze wrong. But something about this moment felt huge, like opening Pandora's box, except hopefully with less unleashing of evil upon humanity, and more finding out why a dying millionaire had given me a farmhouse everyone assumed was worthless. Inside the envelope were three things. A handwritten letter on matching cream stationery, a smaller sealed envelope marked for later, and a brass key that looked old and important. The kind of key that definitely didn't go to anything as mundane as a tractor or a garden shed. It had weight to it, substance, and an ornate design on the handle that looked almost Victorian. I unfolded the letter, And Richard's voice practically jumped off the page. Even his handwriting had attitude. All sharp angles and confident strokes despite the shakiness age and illness had added. Travis, it began because Richard had never been one for dear or any of that sentimental greeting card garbage. If you're reading this, I'm dead. Which means I finally escaped listening to Lauren talk about her brand Synergy or whatever horseshit she's calling it these days. Small mercies. I actually laughed out loud, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls around me. Even from beyond the grave, the old man couldn't resist taking shots at his daughters. The letter continued. If my daughters are laughing right now, and let's be honest, they definitely are. Let them. They think they won. They think they got the empire, the company, the golden ticket to Easy Street. They have no idea what they actually got, but they'll figure it out soon enough. Probably around month 3 when they realize running a textile company requires more than posting pictures on Instagram and attending charity brunches where they pretend to give a damn about literacy or saving the whales or whatever cause is trendy this season. I could picture Richard writing this probably hooked up to oxygen, morphine dripping into his veins, still sharp as a tack and twice as mean. The man had been barely able to walk to the bathroom without assistance. But his mind had stayed clear right up until the end, cataloging every slight, every absence, every fake. I'll visit soon text message his daughters had sent. The farmhouse isn't what it seems, Richard wrote. And I felt my pulse quicken. 82. Willow Creek Road has been in my family for 4 generations. My grandfather built that house with his own hands back in 1924. And every Hawthorne man since has added something to it. My father put in the basement. I added the workshop. But what's under the old cider press in that basement? That's something nobody knows about except me, my accountant, Miriam Lopez, and now you. The old cider press. I remembered it vaguely from the one time Richard had taken me out to the farmhouse about 3 years ago back when he was still healthy and just wanted someone to help him move some furniture. His daughters had deemed too country for their aesthetic. The press had been this massive antique thing in the corner of the basement made of wood and iron and looking like a museum piece from the agricultural revolution. We'd moved boxes around it and I'd asked if it still worked. Everything in that house still works, Richard had said. You just have to know how to use it. At the time, I'd figured he was just being philosophical about old stuff, but now that memory hit different. The letter continued. Go to the basement. Move the cider press. It's on wheels. Easier than it looks. Underneath you'll find a trap door. The brass key opens it. What's inside is what I couldn't trust anyone else with. Travis, you earned it. You sat with a dying old bastard when everyone else found convenient excuses. You changed my oxygen tanks. You made me terrible soup that I complained about but secretly appreciated. And you treated me like a human being instead of a walking ATM or an obligation you could outsource. My throat felt tight reading that, remembering all those nights sitting with Richard, watching Clint Eastwood movies, and listening to him tell stories about building his company from nothing, about the risks he took, the people who doubted him, the times he almost lost everything and somehow clawed his way back. Inside that envelope marked for later, Richard's letter went on, are instructions for what comes next. Don't open it yet. First, go to the farmhouse. See what I left you. Then, and only then, read those instructions. Trust me on this, kid. The order matters. The letter ended with, they thought I was just a senile old man rambling about the past. They thought all I cared about was the company, the legacy, the Hawthorne name. But here's what they never understood. A legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you leave it with. Make me proud, Travis. And if you get a chance, tell Melissa that Karma's A with a long memory and excellent accounting skills. R.H. I sat there holding this letter, reading it 3 times, feeling emotions I couldn't quite name. Richard had planned this. Every detail, the farmhouse that everyone mocked, the mysterious inheritance, this entire elaborate setup, it was all intentional. The man had orchestrated his final move like a chess grandmaster playing against opponents who didn't even know they were in a game. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. Don't get your hopes up about whatever Dad wrote. He was probably medicated and sentimental. The farmhouse is still a dump. Maybe you can flip it and finally afford a decent vacation. Another buzz. Tiffany. Honestly, Travis, you should thank us for not contesting the will. We could have argued you manipulated Dad in his final days. We're being generous. And Lauren, no hard feelings about the inheritance distribution. Dad knew what he was doing. Some people are meant to build empires and some people are meant to maintain old houses. Both are important. Heart emoji, prayer hands emoji, house emoji. The condescension was so thick I could have spread it on toast. They were so convinced they'd won. So absolutely certain that their 12 million in stock was the prize and my farmhouse was the consolation trophy for the loser who'd done all the work. I looked at the brass key in my palm, feeling its weight, its promise of secrets. Then I looked at the smaller sealed envelope marked for later, resisting the urge to rip it open right there in my truck like some impatient kid on Christmas morning. But Richard had said the order mattered. And if there was one thing I'd learned about Richard Hawthorne over the past few months, it was that when he said something mattered, you listened. I started the truck, the engine rumbling to life with that reliable working-class growl that probably offended every luxury vehicle in the garage. As I pulled out into the afternoon sunlight, heading toward the highway that would take me to Willow Creek, my phone buzzed one more time. Melissa, again, by the way, we're having the lawyers draw up papers for us to buy that farmhouse from you. We'll give you $80,000, which is way more than it's worth. Consider it a gift. You could really use the money and we can tear it down and develop the land properly. Win-win. I smiled, pocketing my phone without responding. She had no idea what was waiting under that old cider press, what Richard had really left me, what this was actually all about. But she was about to find out. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see her face when she did. The farmhouse was calling. And for the first time since Richard died, I felt something dangerous blooming in my chest. Hope mixed with vindication, anticipation with a healthy dose of you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating the handyman. Karma wasn't just running on schedule anymore. It was about to pay dividends. The drive to Willow Creek took about 45 minutes through suburbs that gradually dissolved into actual countryside. The kind where gas stations become scarce and Dollar General stores are considered major retail developments. The farmhouse sat on 12 acres at the end of a gravel road that hadn't been properly maintained since probably the Clinton administration, surrounded by fields that had gone wild and enough trees to qualify as a small forest. It was the kind of property that real estate agents would describe as rustic and full of potential, which is code for bring a contractor, a priest, and low expectations. I hadn't been out here since Richard got sick, and pulling up to the place hit me with this weird wave of nostalgia mixed with apprehension. The house itself was exactly as everyone described. A 2-story white farmhouse that had definitely seen better decades with a wraparound porch that sagged in places, shutters that hung at angles that defied both physics and any sense of aesthetic harmony, and a roof that looked like it was holding on through sheer stubbornness and possibly spite. The paint was peeling in spots, giving it that haunted by the ghosts of better maintenance decisions vibe that every old farmhouse eventually achieves. But here's the thing nobody understood about this place. Richard had loved it. Not in the way his daughters love their penthouses or luxury cars, but genuinely loved it. He'd told me once during one of our late-night morphine philosophical conversations that this farmhouse represented everything he'd built his empire to escape from and everything he wished he'd never left behind. Progress isn't always forward, Travis, he'd said. Sometimes it's just expensive. I parked in the overgrown driveway, grabbed my flashlight from the truck bed because country properties don't believe in adequate lighting, and headed for the front door. The key Richard had given me months ago still worked. The lock clicking open with that satisfying sound of old mechanisms that were built back when things were made to actually last instead of planned to obsolete in 3 years. Inside, the house smelled like dust, old wood, and memories nobody had bothered to visit. The furniture was covered in white sheets like ghosts of a life Richard had maintained but never really lived in these last few years. The living room had a stone fireplace big enough to roast a small cow, hardwood floors that creaked with character, and windows that looked out over the property with views that probably cost millions in other zip codes, but here just came with mosquitoes and property taxes nobody wanted to pay. I made my way through the house to the basement door, which was hidden in the back of the kitchen behind what looked like a regular pantry, but was actually a false front. Because, of course, Richard had secret passages in his farmhouse. The man couldn't do anything straightforward if his life depended on it. The door swung open with a horror movie creak that would have made any self-respecting ghost proud, revealing wooden stairs that descended into darkness thick enough to cut with a knife. The basement was unfinished. All concrete floors and exposed beams with that particular smell basements have. That's part earth, part mildew, and part something definitely died down here once. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating cardboard boxes labeled in Richard's handwriting. Christmas decorations 1987. Hacks records. Keep forever apparently. And my personal favorite, Melissa's childhood art. Terrible, but she cried when I tried to throw it out. And there in the far corner, exactly where Richard said it would be, sat the old cider press. It was this massive contraption made of dark wood and iron, probably weighing several hundred pounds, looking like something that belonged in a museum exhibit about agricultural history, titled How Our Ancestors Turned Apples into Alcohol Before They Invented Therapy. I walked over to it, running my hand along the warm wood, and noticed for the first time what I'd missed 3 years ago. Wheels. Heavy-duty industrial caster wheels had been installed on the base, hidden by the shadows, and deliberately positioned to look like they were just part of the original structure, but these were new, modern, probably rated for serious weight. Richard had modified this thing specifically to be moved. I pushed and the cider press rolled aside easier than I expected, smooth and silent like it had been oiled recently, which it probably had been. Knowing Richard and his attention to detail, he'd probably been maintaining this secret right up until he couldn't get out here anymore. Underneath, set into the concrete floor, was a trapdoor, not some old wooden thing you'd expect in a farmhouse basement, but a modern steel door with a brushed metal finish, complete with a keyhole that looked like it belonged on a safe deposit box and a small keypad that glowed faintly blue in the darkness. "You magnificent, sneaky old bastard," I whispered, pulling out the brass key Richard had left me. The key slid into the lock like it was coming home, turning with a solid click that echoed in the basement. But the door didn't open. The keypad blinked, waiting for a code. Of course, there was a code. Richard wasn't about to make this too easy, even from beyond the grave. I stood there thinking, my mind racing through possibilities. Richard's birthday, too obvious. The company's founding date, maybe, but that felt too corporate for something this personal. Then it hit me. The date Richard had taken me to the farmhouse the first time, the day he'd shown me around and told me about his grandfather building this place with his own hands. It had been his father's birthday, October 7, 1924. I typed in October 7, 1924. The keypad beeped once, turned green, and the steel door clicked open with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like a bank vault in a heist movie. I pulled the door up, revealing a ladder descending about 8 feet into what looked like a small concrete room. LED lights flickered on automatically as I climbed down, motion activated, illuminating a space about 10 feet by 10 feet that looked like it had been carved out and poured specifically for this purpose. The walls were lined with metal shelving, and sitting on those shelves were plastic storage containers, filing boxes, and a small safe built directly into the concrete wall. My hands were shaking again as I opened the first container. Inside were legal documents, dozens of them, all organized with colored tabs and labels in Richard's meticulous handwriting. I pulled out the first folder and the label made my heart stop. Hawthorne Holdings, Private Assets. Travis Michael Donovan, Managing Director. Managing Director. Me, Travis, Mr. Average Donovan, the guy who fixed garbage disposals at family gatherings and got introduced as the handyman with no ambition. I opened the folder with hands that had forgotten how to be steady. Inside were incorporation papers for something called Willow Creek Holdings LLC, established 6 years ago with me listed as the managing director and sole beneficiary upon Richard's death. There were stock certificates, real estate deeds, offshore account information with banks I'd only heard about in movies about international espionage, and investment portfolios that made my eyes water. I grabbed another folder. This one was labeled Liquid Assets Transfer Complete. March 14th. The date was 1 day before Richard had updated his will, right before he'd call me to come over and help him organize some paperwork. I thought we were just filing old tax returns. Turns out we were orchestrating the financial equivalent of a magic trick where the rabbit disappears from one hat and shows up in another, except the rabbit was $9.4 million. $9.4 million. I had to sit down on the concrete floor because my legs just quit working. The number was right there in black and white, printed on official bank statements, verified by Miriam Lopez's signature as the accountant of record, dated and notarized, and absolutely, completely mind-blowingly real. While Melissa and her sisters had been fighting over designer handbags and posting filtered selfies about family values, Richard had been quietly liquidating portions of his holdings, moving assets around like a financial chess master, creating this entirely separate entity that nobody knew about except him, his accountant, and apparently now me. There was a letter paper clipped to the bank statements handwritten on the same cream stationery as the letter in the car. Travis, surprise. This is what they missed while they were too busy measuring the curtains in their inheritance. I spent 6 years moving money, selling off pieces of the company nobody paid attention to, investing in properties and portfolios that actually made sense instead of just looking good on paper. Willow Creek Holdings owns 17 commercial properties, has investments in 4 different continents, and controls enough liquid assets to make my daughter's $12 million look like pocket change. The company they got, it's a shell, kid. The pretty exterior with nothing but debt and my stubbornness holding it together. You got the heart. Use it wisely. Make something that matters. And when Melissa inevitably calls you crying for money in about 6 months, feel free to remind her that karma keeps excellent receipts. R.H. I sat there in that secret underground room surrounded by evidence of Richard's final masterpiece. And I laughed. I laughed so hard I scared what sounded like mice or possibly raccoons in the basement above me. I laughed until tears rolled down my face and my stomach hurt and I couldn't breathe right because Richard Hawthorne, the complicated man his daughters had eulogized without knowing. The millionaire everyone thought they understood, had pulled off the most beautiful, vindictive, absolutely perfect con I'd ever seen. He'd given them exactly what they wanted. The company, the prestige, the title of Hawthorne Industries Air ISIS. And in doing so, he'd given them nothing but a sinking ship with their names on it. And me, the average handyman, the son-in-law with no ambition, the guy who'd shown up and made terrible soup. I got the empire they didn't even know existed. I climbed out of that secret room, closed the trap door, rolled the cider press back into place, and walked out of the basement into the late afternoon sunlight, feeling like I just discovered I was the protagonist in a story I didn't know I was in. My phone buzzed. Another text from Melissa. Travis, seriously, think about our offer. $80,000 is really generous for that dump. You could pay off your truck. I looked at my phone, then at the farmhouse, then at the 12 acres of worthless property that came with a secret $9 million trust fund and enough investments to make me rethink my entire understanding of wealth. I typed back. I'll think about it. But what I was really thinking was, Richard, you magnificent, devious, absolutely brilliant old man. You really did save the best for last. And somewhere, I swear I could hear him laughing. I called Miriam Lopez at 7:30 the next morning because I'd spent the entire night lying awake in bed staring at my ceiling, my brain doing mathematical gymnastics it wasn't qualified for and coming up with numbers that seemed impossible. Melissa had been snoring next to me, dead to the world, after spending 3 hours on the phone with her sisters planning how they were going to restructure Hawthorne Textiles and maximize shareholder value, which I'm pretty sure meant firing half the staff and buying themselves corner offices with views that cost more than those employees' annual salaries. Miriam's number had been in one of the folders in the secret basement vault written on a business card that was so old school it might as well have been carved on a stone tablet. Miriam Lopez, CPA, when you need someone who actually understands numbers and won't steal your money. That was really her tagline. I loved her already, and we hadn't even spoken. She picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert like she'd been awake for hours, probably because she had been. Accountants are a different breed. They wake up at 500 a.m. voluntarily, and think recreational spreadsheet organizing is a valid hobby. Travis Donovan, she said before I even introduced myself. I've been waiting for your call. Took you longer than Richard predicted. He said you'd find the vault within 24 hours. It's been 36. Traffic was bad. I said, which was a lie, but also somehow felt true emotionally. She laughed. This sharp bark of amusement that sounded like she'd spent too many years dealing with rich peoples to be surprised by anything anymore. Can you meet me at Rosie's Diner off Highway 42 in an hour? We need to talk and I need to see your face when I explain exactly what you just inherited. It's going to be fun for me. I mean, you're probably going to need several cups of coffee and maybe a paper bag to breathe into. Rosie's Diner was one of those classic American establishments that looked like it hadn't been remodeled since Eisenhower was president and wore that fact like a badge of honor. Red vinyl booth with duct tape holding together the seats, a checkerboard floor that had seen better decades, and a jukebox in the corner that probably still played actual vinyl records if you pumped enough quarters into it. The coffee was served in thick ceramic mugs that could double as weapons in a pinch, and the menu featured things like Trucker Special and the Heart Attack platter with no irony whatsoever. Miriam was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a laptop open, 3 manila folders stacked beside her, and a cup of coffee that looked like it could strip paint. She was in her mid-50s with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, wearing glasses that hung on a chain around her neck and a blazer that said, "I'm professional, but I will also fight you if necessary." She had the look of someone who'd spent decades watching wealthy people make terrible decisions and had stopped being surprised by human stupidity sometime during the dot bubble. "You must be Travis," she said, looking up from her laptop with eyes that assessed me like I was a tax return. She was auditing for discrepancies. "Sit. Order something. You're going to need calories for this conversation." I slid into the booth across from her just as a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the Carter administration appeared with a coffee pot. Her name tag said, Deb. And she poured my coffee without asking if I wanted any, which is the kind of service I can respect. "What will it be, honey?" Deb asked, her voice carrying that particular rasp of someone who'd smoked a pack a day for 40 years and wasn't about to apologize for it. "Pancakes," I said. Because when your life is imploding in the best possible way, you eat pancakes and bacon. Lots of bacon. "Smart man," Miriam said as Deb walked away. "You're going to need protein and carbs for what I'm about to tell you." She closed her laptop, pushed it aside, and pulled the manila folders in front of her like a dealer about to reveal a winning hand. "So, you found Richard's little treasure trove. How'd that feel?" "Like I was in a movie, except I'm pretty sure the budget was higher and the plot made more sense," I said, wrapping my hands around the coffee mug. "Miriam, what the hell did Richard do?" She smiled. And it was the smile of someone who'd been waiting years to watch this particular bomb go off. "What Richard did, Travis, was spend the last 6 years of his life orchestrating the most beautiful screw you to his daughters that I've ever witnessed in 30 years of accounting for wealthy families. And trust me, I've seen some impressive family warfare. Once watched a guy leave his entire estate to his cat just to spite his kids. But Richard was playing a different game entirely." She opened the first folder, spinning it around so I could see the contents. It was a timeline meticulously documented, showing asset transfers dating back 6 years. "Richard came to me in 2019, Miriam explained, her finger tracing down the dates. Said he wanted to restructure his holdings because he didn't trust his daughters to manage real wealth. They were already fighting over designer clothes and country club memberships, and the company was still running fine with him at the helm. He could see the writing on the wall. When he died, they'd tear everything apart, fighting over scraps and status. So, he started moving money," I said, scanning the documents. "Not just moving it, transforming it. Richard was brilliant, Travis. Most people think textile manufacturing in America is dead, right? Outsourced to Bangladesh and Vietnam, race to the bottom, all that depressing economic reality. And on the surface, that's exactly what Hawthorne Textiles looked like. A struggling legacy company barely holding on through Richard's sheer stubbornness and some loyal contracts he'd maintained through relationships built over 40 years. She pulled out another folder, this one thicker, but what nobody knew. Not his daughters, not the board, not even most of his employees, was that Richard had been quietly selling off the profitable parts of the company piece by piece. He'd identify a division that was actually making money, spin it off into a separate entity under Willow Creek Holdings and replace it with debt and underperforming assets back in the main company. Like performing surgery on a business, removing all the healthy organs, and leaving behind a pretty corpse that looked fine from the outside, but was basically running on fumes and inherited reputation. My pancakes arrived, and I forgot they existed. So, the company the girls got is a beautiful, prestigious shell worth about $12 million on paper, but actually carrying $8 million in debt that's structured to come due over the next 3 years. They got the Hawthorne name, the headquarters building, which is mortgaged to hell, some equipment that's outdated, contracts that are barely profitable, and a workforce that's going to need massive restructuring to stay solvent. In short, they got a full-time job that pays terribly and comes with a ticking time bomb of financial obligations. And I got the empire's heart, Miriam said, leaning back with satisfaction. 17 commercial properties generating passive income across 3 states. A minority stake in a Vietnamese textile manufacturer that's actually killing it. Richard got in early, by the way, before it was cool. Investments in sustainable farming operations, tech startups focused on fabric innovation, even a small but growing online custom clothing platform that's positioned perfectly for the next decade of retail, plus the liquid assets. $9.4 million in diversified portfolios that survived the 2020 market crash beautifully because Richard was paranoid and smart about risk management. I finally took a bite of pancakes, but they tasted like cardboard because my brain was too busy exploding. "Why me?" I asked. I'm a contractor. I build decks and renovate kitchens. I have no business managing millions of dollars." Miriam smiled softer this time. "That's exactly why he chose you, Travis. You're not blinded by the money because you didn't grow up with it. You understand the value of work because you've actually done it. And more importantly, you showed up. You sat with a dying man, changed his oxygen tanks, made him terrible soup that he complained about but ate anyway because it came from someone who actually gave a damn." She reached across the table and put her hand on mine, her grip firm and warm. "Richard told me about you, Travis, about how you'd tell him jokes to distract him from the pain. How you'd watch those old westerns with him even though you probably thought they were boring as hell. How you treated him like a person instead of an ATM or an obligation. He said, you were the only one who saw him as Richard instead of as Richard Hawthorne, textile magnate." My throat felt tight. I just didn't want him to die alone. "And that," Miriam said, squeezing my hand once before pulling back, "is exactly why you're sitting here with a $9 million trust fund, and they're sitting with a company that's about to teach them very expensive lessons about what real work actually looks like. Richard didn't just give you money, Travis. He gave you opportunity. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" I looked down at the folders, at the documentation of Richard's years-long plan, at the evidence that someone had believed in me more than I'd ever believed in myself. "I have no idea," I admitted. Good, Miriam said, raising her coffee mug in a toast. That's the first step to not screwing it up. The second step is hiring me to continue managing your accounts because, honey, you seem like a good guy, but I wouldn't trust you to balance a checkbook without adult supervision. I laughed, actually laughed, and clicked my mug against hers. Deal. But I have one question. Shoot. Does Melissa know any of this yet? Miriam's smile turned absolutely wicked. Oh, Travis. The trust became public record yesterday when it was officially transferred to you. So, she knows you got something more than a farmhouse. She just doesn't know exactly what yet, but she will. Very, very soon. How soon? Check your phone. I pulled out my phone and there were 17 missed calls from Melissa, 12 from Tiffany, and 9 from Lauren, plus approximately 47 text messages that I'm pretty sure violated several communication decency laws. Miriam laughed, that sharp bark again. And that, Travis, is what we call reality setting in. Welcome to the empire. Try not to let it go to your head. But it was too late. I was already grinning. I decided to spend the afternoon at the farmhouse after my meeting with Miriam. Partly because I wanted to explore the property with fresh eyes now that I knew it came with a $9 million bonus package, but mostly because I needed somewhere to be when Melissa inevitably figured out what had happened and came looking for blood. The farmhouse seemed like neutral territory, or at least territory where I could see her coming from a distance, and prepare myself emotionally. I'd stopped at a grocery store on the way and picked up the ingredients for lemonade. Real lemonade, not that powder crap from a jar. Because if I was going to face down my wife's inevitable meltdown, I was going to do it while sipping something refreshing and pretending I had my life together. There's something deeply satisfying about making lemonade from scratch when life has just handed you the metaphorical equivalent of a lemon orchard in a sugar factory. I was sitting on the farmhouse's front porch in an old rocking chair I'd found in the barn, watching the sun start its lazy descent toward the horizon and feeling pretty damn philosophical about everything. When I heard the sound of tires on gravel moving way too fast for a residential road, the sound got louder, angrier, like the vehicle itself was pissed off. And then Melissa's white Mercedes SUV came flying around the bend doing at least 50 on a road that suggested 25 if you valued your suspension. She slammed on the brakes hard enough. That gravel sprayed everywhere, creating this dramatic cloud of dust that would have been perfect for a movie entrance. Except this was real life and way more terrifying. The driver's door flew open before the dust even settled. And Melissa emerged wearing designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, heels that had no business being worn on a gravel driveway, and an expression that suggested she was about to commit a felony and felt completely justified about it. "You stole it," she screamed, storming toward the porch with her finger pointed at me like a weapon. "You manipulated him. You poisoned his mind against us. You." She was so angry she couldn't even finish the sentence. Just stood there at the bottom of the porch steps vibrating with rage and expensive perfume. I took a long, slow sip of my lemonade, letting the silence stretch out like taffy, and then calmly said, "Nope. Your dad gave it to me. Maybe because I actually changed his oxygen tanks instead of my outfit every 3 hours." Her face went from red to purple, which I didn't even know was possible on a human being outside of cartoon characters. "Don't you dare act self-righteous with me, Travis. We know what you did. We talked to Charles Henderson and he confirmed that Dad set up some trust fund for you months before he died." While we were grieving, I interrupted, setting my lemonade down on the porch railing. "You were on a work trip in Austin photographing yoga pants. Tiffany was in Seattle finding herself or whatever rich people call avoiding responsibility these days. Lauren was posting thirst traps on Instagram and calling it content creation. I was the one here, Melissa. Me alone doing the actual work of caring for a dying human being. We couldn't handle it emotionally," she shouted. And I swear she actually believed that. Like emotional unavailability was a valid excuse for abandoning your father. "You know, hospitals trigger my anxiety. My therapist said, 'Your therapist doesn't know your dad died thinking his daughters cared more about handbags than him,'" I said quietly, and that landed like a punch. I could see it in her face, the flinch, the moment of doubt before the anger rushed back in to cover it up. Before she could respond, 2 more vehicles pulled up. Tiffany's black Audi and Lauren's red Tesla because of course they'd carpooled their rage. The sisters emerged like a well-dressed mob, their heels clicking on gravel in synchronized fury. "Travis," Tiffany yelled, marching over with her phone already out like she was documenting evidence for a future lawsuit. "We demand to see the documentation for this so-called trust fund. Our lawyers say we have grounds to contest it based on undue influence. Your lawyers are going to charge you about $500 an hour to tell you what I'm about to tell you for free," I said, standing up and leaning against the porch post. Your dad was completely mentally competent when he set this up. Miriam Lopez, his accountant who's been with him for 30 years, will testify to that. Charles Henderson, the family lawyer you've known since you were kids, will confirm it. You don't have a case. You have hurt feelings and expensive legal bills. Lauren had her phone out, too, filming everything because apparently the girl couldn't experience reality without documenting it for her followers. This is elder abuse, she announced to her phone camera. Her voice taking on that performative quality influencers use when they're pretending to be passionate about something. Financial manipulation of a vulnerable senior citizen. My followers need to know about this. Accountability is important. Perfect, I said, smiling directly at her camera. Make sure you post it with the caption, "How to lose $9 million in 9 months by abandoning your dying father." Really captures the essence of your family values. Very on brand. That stopped her cold. She lowered the phone, her perfectly contoured face scrunching up in confusion. What do you mean 9 million? Charles said it was a trust fund, not Travis. How much did Dad leave you? And there it was, the moment I'd been simultaneously dreading and anticipating since Miriam had laid out the numbers for me at Rosie's diner. I could have been diplomatic about it. I could have softened the blow, been the bigger person, taken the high road. But you know what? Screw the high road. The high road doesn't get you anywhere when you're dealing with people who've spent years treating you like the help. 9.4 million, I said clearly. In liquid assets alone, plus 17 commercial properties, minority stakes in several profitable businesses, and investments across 4 continents. Willow Creek Holdings, I'm the managing director. Your dad spent 6 years building it while you were busy posting about gratitude and manifesting abundance without actually understanding what either of those words meant. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear birds chirping in the trees behind the house. It was like someone had hit pause on reality and forgotten to press play again. Tiffany spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. That's impossible. The company was worth 12 million. We got the company. The math doesn't. The math works fine when you understand your dad gave you a sinking ship with a pretty paint job. I explained, enjoying this way more than I probably should have. Hawthorne Textiles is carrying 8 million in structured debt. He gutted the profitable divisions and moved them under Willow Creek Holdings. You got the name, the prestige, and a whole lot of financial problems that are going to start coming due in about 18 months. Congratulations on your inheritance. Hope you kept the receipts on those celebration outfits. Melissa's legs seemed to give out. She actually sat down on the porch steps, her designer jeans getting dusty, her face blank with shock. He wouldn't do that, she said. But her voice had lost all its conviction. He loved us. He was our father. He did love you, I said. And I meant it. But he loved you enough to teach you a lesson you desperately needed to learn. You can't just show up for the good parts, Melissa. You can't go someone when they're dying and expect to inherit their respect along with their money. Life doesn't work that way. Karma doesn't work that way. Tiffany had her phone to her ear now, probably calling her lawyer, pacing back and forth in the driveway, and hissing about litigation and legal options. Lauren had started crying. Actual tears, which was shocking because I didn't think she was capable of genuine emotion that wasn't curated for social media engagement. We deserve our share, Lauren sobbed, mascara running down her face in black rivers. We're his daughters. We're his blood. You're just the guy who married Melissa. You're nothing. And that right there, that entitled, spoiled, completely lacking in self-awareness statement was exactly why Richard had done what he did. You're right, I said calmly. I'm just the guy who married Melissa. The guy who showed up, the guy who made soup and changed oxygen tanks and watched old westerns at 2 o'clock in the morning because your dad couldn't sleep and was scared of dying alone. I'm nothing special, Lauren. I'm just someone who actually gave a damn. Apparently, that was special enough for Richard. Tiffany stormed back over. Her lawyer apparently not answering because it was Sunday afternoon. And even attorneys who charge by the breath need time off. This isn't over, Travis. We're going to fight this. You're going to waste money you don't have on lawyers who will tell you what I already told you. I interrupted. But hey, it's your financial funeral. I'll send flowers. They'll be nice ones, too, because unlike you, I can actually afford them now. Melissa stood up slowly, dust falling from her jeans, her face a mixture of anger and something that might have been betrayal. I want a divorce, she said quietly. Yeah, I replied, not even surprised. I figured I'll make it easy for you. You can keep the house, the cars, whatever. I don't need any of it. But just so we're clear, Melissa, you're not getting a dime of Richard's money. It's in an ironclad trust that specifically excludes you in the event of divorce. Your dad thought of everything. Even this conversation probably. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Or maybe like she was realizing she'd never actually seen me at all. "You've changed," she said. "No," I corrected her. "I just stopped pretending I was okay with how you treated me." "Big difference." The three of them left together, a defeated trio, climbing into their luxury vehicles and pulling away much slower than they'd arrived, leaving behind nothing but dust and the faint smell of expensive perfume that got carried away by the evening breeze. I sat back down in the rocking chair, picked up my lemonade, and took a long drink. It had gotten warm, but it still tasted like victory. The farmhouse creaked around me, settling into the evening, and somewhere in the fields beyond, I heard an owl starting its nightly haunt. For the first time in 8 years of marriage, I felt peaceful. The divorce papers came through in record time, mainly because Melissa wanted out faster than a shopaholic leaving a store that just announced it's going out of business. She signed everything without contesting, probably because her lawyers had explained in very expensive detail that fighting me would cost more than whatever she might win, which was exactly nothing. I kept Richard's trust and the farmhouse. She kept our suburban house that I'd never really liked anyway, her Mercedes, and enough furniture to stage a moderately successful estate sale. We split the marriage assets down the middle like civilized adults who'd stopped pretending we'd ever actually liked each other. And just like that, 8 years of matrimony dissolved faster than my faith in the institution had about 6 years prior. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I sat down with Miriam Lopez and Charles Henderson in what was rapidly becoming my favorite conference room at Henderson and Blay. The small one on the third floor that didn't have pretentious art on the walls and had a coffee maker that actually worked without requiring an engineering degree to operate. We brought in lunch from a local deli because this was going to be a marathon meeting, the kind where you need pastrami sandwiches and actual sustenance to make it through discussions about corporate restructuring and asset management without your brain leaking out your ears. "All right," Miriam said, spreading papers across the table like a general planning a military campaign, which wasn't far off from what we were actually doing. "Let's talk about what you want to do with Willow Creek Holdings, Travis, because right now you've got a collection of assets that are making money, sure, but they're not really doing anything meaningful. They're just existing. Richard built you a foundation, but now you need to decide what kind of house you're building on it." I'd been thinking about this for days, lying awake at night in the farmhouse that was slowly starting to feel like home instead of just a building I'd inherited. Richard had given me resources, yes, but more importantly, he'd given me an opportunity to do something that actually mattered instead of just existing in someone else's shadow. The question was, what did Travis Donovan actually care about? "Sustainable farming," I said, surprised by how certain I sounded. "And textile restoration, but the right way." Richard told me once that his grandfather had started the company because he wanted to make clothes that lasted that people could pass down to their kids. Quality over quantity. But then the market changed, fast fashion became a thing, and the company had to adapt or die. Except adapting meant compromising everything his grandfather had built the company on in the first place. Charles Henderson leaned forward, his glasses catching the light. He'd taken off his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and looked more human than I'd ever seen him in his natural lawyer habitat. "You want to go back to that original vision? Make Willow Creek Holdings about quality textiles and sustainable practices." "Not just quality textiles," I said. The idea forming even as I spoke it out loud. "I want to create a model that proves you can make money and do good at the same time. Local textile manufacturing using sustainable materials. Partnering with small farms that are doing things right instead of factory farms that are destroying the environment. Create jobs in communities that actually need them instead of outsourcing everything to the cheapest labor market we can find." I know it sounds idealistic and probably stupid from a pure profit standpoint. It sounds exactly like something Richard would have done if his daughters hadn't pushed him toward maximizing quarterly earnings. Miriam interrupted and she was smiling. "Travis, you have $9 million in liquid assets and 17 income-generating properties. You've got the financial cushion to take risks that most startups can't afford. And more importantly, you've got something even more valuable. You give a damn. That's surprisingly rare in business." Over the next 3 hours, fueled by pastrami sandwiches and coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of despair, we mapped out a 5-year plan for Willow Creek Holdings. We'd restructure it into a proper investment firm with a focus on sustainable agriculture and ethical textile production. We'd partner with that Vietnamese manufacturer Richard had invested in early, the one that was already doing things right, and use them as a model for expanding into domestic production. We buy out struggling small farms and convert them to sustainable practices, creating a supply chain that actually made sense both environmentally and economically. Miriam suggested we bring in a consultant who specialized in BC Corp certifications, companies that meet rigorous standards of social and environmental performance. Charles recommended we talk to a friend of his who ran a nonprofit focused on rural economic development. Someone who could help us identify communities where our investment could make the biggest impact. I sat there taking notes like I was back in college. Except this time the subject was how to use inherited wealth without turning into the thing you always hated, which definitely wasn't offered at my community college. We should also fix up the farmhouse, I said during a lull in the conversation. Make it the headquarters for Willow Creek Holdings. Nothing fancy, just restore it properly. Solar panels, energy efficient everything. Turn it into a working example of what we're trying to promote. The optics on that are perfect, Charles said, nodding. Billionaire as fancy downtown office runs empire from restored farmhouse. The media will eat it up. I'm not a billionaire. I protested. I've got 9 million, not 900 million. Miriam laughed. Honey, to 99% of America, you're absolutely a billionaire. Embrace it. Use it. Just don't let it turn you into I hired a local contractor, not a big corporate firm, but Jake Morrison, a guy I'd worked with on various projects over the years, who understood the difference between renovation and destruction. Jake showed up to the farmhouse 3 days later with his crew, took one look at the place, and let out a low whistle that contractors reserve for projects that are either going to be really fun or really expensive. Sometimes both. Travis, my man, Jake said, walking around the porch and poking at boards with a professional skepticism that comes from years of discovering problems hiding under pretty facades. This place has good bones, but we're talking a full restoration here. New roof, electrical upgrade, plumbing that doesn't date back to when Truman was president. You sure you want to dump money into it? I'm sure, I said, but I want it done right. Energy efficient, solar panels, the whole sustainable 9 yards. Make it a house that Richard's grandfather would recognize, but wouldn't feel outdated in. Can you do that? Jake grinned. Can I do it, brother? I've been waiting my whole career for a client who actually wants to do things properly instead of whatever's cheapest. When do we start? Yesterday, I said, and his grin got wider. The renovation took 3 months, and watching that farmhouse transform was like watching someone go from barely surviving to actually thriving. New roof with solar panels that made the place look like it was part spaceship, part farmhouse. Windows that were actually energy efficient instead of decorative holes that leaked heat and money. Plumbing that worked on the first try without making sounds like a dying walrus. Fresh paint, not stark white, but a warm cream color that looked like sunshine and optimism had a baby. And on the front porch, Jake installed a custom-built swing made from reclaimed wood that could hold 3 people comfortably or one person having an existential crisis about inherited wealth, which was becoming my new favorite hobby. People in town started noticing Willow Creek wasn't exactly a metropolis. Population hovered around 3,000 on a good day when everyone was home and someone wasn't visiting relatives in the city. So, when someone dumps money into restoring the old Hawthorne farmhouse and starts a business that's creating actual jobs, word spreads faster than gossip at a church potluck. Frank, Richard's old neighbor, stopped by one afternoon while I was sitting on the new porch swing with my laptop, pretending to understand the quarterly reports Miriam had sent over, but mostly just appreciating that I owned a porch swing now. Look at you, Frank said, climbing the porch steps with the careful deliberation of an 83-year-old who'd fallen once and wasn't eager to repeat the experience. The farmer CEO, that's what people are calling you down at the hardware store. Travis Donovan, the contractor who inherited a fortune and didn't immediately turn into a jackass. You're a local legend, son. The farmer CEO, I repeated, testing the phrase out loud. It sounded ridiculous and perfect at the same time. Like a nickname you initially hate but eventually grows on you like moss on a tree. I like that. Sounds way better than Mr. Average. That's what Richard's daughters used to call you? Frank asked, settling into the rocking chair I'd left out specifically for him since he'd started making these visits a regular thing, among other things, I said. Most of which I can't repeat in polite company. Frank chuckled. That raspy laugh of someone who'd smoked for 50 years, quit 30 years ago, and still sounded like he was working through it. You know what Melissa's been calling you lately? Do I want to know? Probably not. But I'm going to tell you anyway because I'm old and don't care about social niceties anymore. She told someone at the grocery store that you're a manipulative con artist who stole her inheritance through elder abuse. Direct quote Cheryl Staff last month trying to cut costs, but it's like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. Word is they're going to file for bankruptcy by end of year. I nodded watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon, painting the fields gold and orange. I didn't feel happy about it. Exactly. But I didn't feel guilty either. Richard had given them exactly what they'd asked for, control of the company, and what they did with it was their responsibility, not mine. Richard knew, I said quietly. He knew exactly what would happen. He gave them enough rope and trusted they'd hang themselves with it. Smart man, Frank said. Mean as hell, but smart. We sat there in comfortable silence. Two men on a porch watching the day end. And I realized this was exactly what I'd been missing in my old life. This peace, this simplicity, this feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The farmer CEO. Yeah, I could live with that. 6 months after the divorce, Hawthorne Textiles Incorporated started imploding like a building in a controlled demolition. Except nobody was controlling anything, and it definitely wasn't going according to plan. Melissa and her sisters had managed to turn their $12 million inheritance into a master class on how not to run a business, which would have been impressive if it wasn't so predictable. First, they'd fired the senior management team, people who'd been with the company for decades and actually knew what they were doing because they wanted to bring in fresh perspectives. Those fresh perspectives turned out to be Tiffany's boyfriend, Chad, who they made marketing director despite his only qualification being that he'd once tried to sell NFTs of cats wearing scarves. That venture had failed spectacularly. But apparently, the Hawthorne sisters believed in second chances when it came to unqualified men they found attractive. The financial reports that crossed Miriam's desk, because of course she still had industry connections feeding her gossip, read like a horror story written by someone who'd never heard of budgets. Melissa had renovated the executive offices for $2 million. Lauren had launched a failed influencer marketing campaign that cost $500,000 and generated exactly zero sales. Tiffany had invested in a revolutionary fabric that turned out to be regular polyester with better branding. The debt Richard had carefully structured to come due started arriving like bills after Christmas. Except instead of credit card statements, it was millions of dollars in loans that nobody had bothered to prepare for. Employees started jumping ship. Clients found other suppliers. The stock price, which had been traded privately among family and investors, plummeted faster than my faith in humanity every time I checked the news. Then came the bankruptcy filing. Chapter 11. Restructuring the whole 9 yards of corporate failure. The headlines wrote themselves: Hawthorne Textiles falls apart under new leadership, and my personal favorite, Sisters inherit empire, immediately drive it into ground. My phone rang at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Melissa's name lit up the screen, and I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Travis, she sobbed, her voice thick with tears and what sounded like expensive wine. Please, I need help. We lost everything. We can start over together, right? We were good once. I looked out at the farmhouse fields, peaceful under moonlight. Melissa, I'm not mad at you, I said calmly. I'm just allergic to stupidity. Then I hung up politely like a gentleman. A year after Richard died, I found myself sitting on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset bleed gold and crimson across fields that had finally been properly cultivated. Willow Creek Holdings was thriving. We'd partnered with 12 local farms, opened a small textile manufacturing facility that employed 60 people from the community, and turned a profit while actually giving a damn about the planet. The farmer CEO thing had stuck, and honestly, I'd stopped fighting it. But success felt hollow without someone to share it with. So, I drove to Oakwood Cemetery that evening, parking near the massive oak tree that shaded Richard's grave. His headstone was simple granite. Nothing ostentatious, just his name and dates with the inscription he'd requested. He showed up. I placed fresh flowers beside it. Wild flowers from the farmhouse property because Richard would have hated expensive florist arrangements, and sat down on the grass like we were having one of our old conversations. You played the long game, old man, I said softly to the headstone. And you won. The girls filed for bankruptcy last month. Melissa's working retail at some boutique, which is ironic considering she used to spend more there monthly than they probably pay her yearly. Tiffany's boyfriend Chad left her for someone with actual money. And Lauren's follower count dropped when people realized she wasn't wealthy anymore. Turns out authenticity doesn't monetize well when you're broke. A breeze rustled through the oak leaves, and I swear it sounded like Richard's raspy laugh. You didn't just leave me money, I continued. You left me purpose, meaning a chance to build something that actually matters instead of just existing in someone else's shadow. The farmhouse is beautiful now. You'd love it. Solar panels, sustainable everything, and that porch swing gets used daily. Sometimes I sit there and imagine you're sitting next to me making sarcastic comments about oatmeal brands and government incompetence. As I stood to leave, evening light caught the headstone inscription, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The inheritance wasn't the money. It wasn't the properties or investments or any of the tangible wealth Richard had transferred. The real inheritance was the lesson. Show up. Be present. Give a damn when it's hard. Build something that outlasts you. I turned toward my truck and I swear I heard his voice on the wind. Told you to hang in there, kid. The fields glowed gold. Birds sang their evening songs. And for the first time in forever, I laughed loud, free, and genuinely happy because karma hadn't just arrived. It had compounded with interest. Story 2. My wife slept with her boss, so I quietly stole his beautiful wife instead. She's so amazing, I told him at the company's party while he stood there shaking with rage. The restaurant was one of those places where the lighting costs more than the food. Soft amber glows pooling on white tablecloths, candles flickering, and glass hurricanes that probably had their own insurance policies. My wife Elena had chosen it. She always chose places like this when she had something to hide. I remember thinking that as I watched her across the table, her fingers dancing around the stem of her wine glass, never quite lifting it to her lips. She was nervous. Beautiful. Yes, Elena had always been beautiful in that effortless way that made other women study her like a puzzle they couldn't solve. But tonight, she was nervous. And Elena was never nervous. "You're quiet," she said. And her voice had that careful quality to it, like she was testing the ice on a frozen lake. "Am I?" I cut into my steak, watching the pink center bleed across the white plate. "Just tired, I guess. Long week, Marcus. It's Tuesday." I smiled. "Then it's going to be a very long week." She didn't laugh. Elena used to laugh at everything I said. Back when we first met. Back when I was the ambitious young architect who sketched our future on napkins and coffee shops. And she was the marketing executive who believed in every line I drew. That was 7 years ago. Somewhere between the mortgage and the promotions, between the dinner parties and the business trips, we'd stopped sketching futures together. Now she just stared at me with those green eyes that used to make me forget my own name. And I could see something moving behind them. Something guilty, something afraid. "I need to tell you something," she said. And there it was. The sentence that changes everything. The sentence that splits your life into before and after. Like a fault line cracking through bedrock. I should have felt something: panic, anger, that hot rush of adrenaline that comes when you know the ground is about to drop out from under you. But instead, I felt calm. Eerily calm. Because I already knew. I'd known for 3 weeks, 2 days, and approximately 6 hours. Ever since I'd come home early from the conference in Boston and found her laptop open on the kitchen counter, a messaging app I didn't recognize glowing on the screen. Ever since I'd seen the messages from D talking about how he couldn't stop thinking about last Tuesday, about the hotel in Manhattan, about how she tasted like honey and regret. I'd stood there in our kitchen, still holding my suitcase, reading messages that described my wife's body in ways I hadn't touched her in months. And I'd felt something inside me go very, very quiet. Not dead, not broken, just quiet. "What do you need to tell me?" I asked. And my voice sounded like it was coming from someone else's throat. She looked down at her untouched risotto. "I've been Marcus. There's no easy way to say this, then say it the hard way." Her eyes snapped up to mine, and I saw surprise there. Elena was used to me being gentle, accommodating, the guy who smoothed over rough edges and kept the peace. She wasn't used to this version of me, the one who'd spent 3 weeks learning to be stone. "I've been seeing someone," she said, and the words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding her breath underwater. "From work. It's Daniel. Daniel Whitmore, my boss." There it was, the confession I'd been waiting for. Spoken into the expensive air of a restaurant where the waiters glided like ghosts and nobody made scenes. I took a sip of my wine, a Bordeaux that cost more than my first car, and let the silence stretch between us like taffy. "How long?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "Yes," she flinched. 4 months. 4 months. 120 days of coming home and kissing me hello with lips that had been on another man. 120 days of lying next to me in bed and probably thinking of him. 120 days of me being the fool who didn't see, didn't know, didn't suspect. Except I had suspected. I'd known deep down. The way you know when a building's foundation is cracked even before the walls start to show it. The late nights at the office, the new lingerie that never made appearances in our bedroom, the way she'd started going to the gym 5 times a week and coming home smelling like expensive soap I hadn't bought her. Daniel Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, the tech giant where Elena had worked her way up from junior marketing associate to VP of brand strategy. 45 years old, married to some socialite I'd seen in magazine spreads, owner of a penthouse in Tribeca and a house in the Hamptons. The kind of man who wore success like cologne. "Are you in love with him?" I asked. Elena's face did something complicated. "Marcus, simple question, Elena. Are you in love with him?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what I feel anymore. I just know that when I'm with him, I feel alive, like I matter, like I'm not just a wife." The words hit like a slap, clean and sharp. I set down my fork with exaggerated care, watching the silver catch the candlelight around us. Other couples laughed and clinked glasses, living in their before moments, not yet knowing their fault lines were forming. "What do you want, Elena?" She looked at me with something that might have been hope or might have been relief. "I want a divorce." And there it was, the nuclear option delivered between the main course and dessert. I should have seen it coming. Hell, part of me had seen it coming, but hearing it spoken out loud was different. It made it real. It made it a thing that was happening, not just a thing I suspected. "Okay," I said. Her eyes widened. "Okay, that's it. Just okay. What do you want me to say, Elena? You've clearly made up your mind. You've been sleeping with your boss for 4 months. You want a divorce. What exactly am I supposed to do? Beg you to stay? Fight for a marriage you've already left?" I thought she trailed off, and I realized she'd expected me to crumble, to cry, to make a scene, to give her the dramatic confrontation that would justify everything, that would make me the bad guy in whatever story she'd been telling herself. But I'd learned something in those 3 weeks of silent knowing. I'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to perform the role someone's written for you. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours," I said, signaling for the check. "We can work out the details civilly. No need to make this uglier than it already is." "Marcus, I don't." I held up a hand. "Please don't. You've said what you needed to say. Let's leave it at that." The waiter brought the check on a small silver tray, and I paid for the meal that would be our last together as husband and wife. $347 for the privilege of having my marriage officially ended over overpriced seafood and undercooked honesty. We drove home in silence. Elena's fingers twisting her wedding ring, the platinum band I'd saved for 6 months to buy. Back when I thought forever meant something. When we pulled into our driveway, she turned to me. "I'll stay at my sister's tonight," she said, "give you some space. That's probably for the best." She got out of the car and I watched her walk to her own vehicle, the Mercedes SUV that Daniel had probably helped her pick out or maybe even bought for her. I wouldn't have known. I'd stopped keeping track of where her money came from months ago, when I'd stopped being able to afford the mental arithmetic of our dissolving life. Inside the house, our house, soon to be my former house, I poured myself a scotch and sat in the leather chair by the window. The one Elena always said made me look like an old man. I stared out at the street, at the other houses with their warm lights and their intact families, and I felt that quiet thing inside me start to shift. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger. Not really. It was something colder, something more deliberate. I pulled out my phone and opened the private folder where I'd been collecting information for the past 3 weeks. Screenshots of messages, credit card statements showing hotel charges, calendar entries that didn't match her supposed work schedule, a photograph I'd taken of her car parked outside a boutique hotel in Soho. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a day she told me she was in meetings until 6 o'clock. I'd been gathering evidence like a man preparing for war, even though I hadn't known what kind of war I was planning to fight. But now, sitting in the quiet of a house that would soon be divided and sold, I began to understand. This wasn't about winning Elena back. That ship had sailed the moment she'd slid into Daniel Whitmore's bed. This wasn't even about revenge. Not in the traditional sense. This was about dignity, about refusing to be the cuckold who never knew, the fool who got played while everyone else whispered and pied. About taking back some measure of control in a situation where I'd been powerless. I opened my laptop and started researching. Daniel Whitmore, 45, CEO, net worth estimated at $200 million, married to Victoria Whitmore née Ashford, daughter of the Ashford Hotel dynasty. One daughter, away at boarding school in Switzerland. Victoria Whitmore. I clicked on her Instagram profile, public. Surprisingly for someone of her social standing, photos of charity galas and museum openings. Photos of her at art galleries and wine tastings. Photos that grew less frequent over the past year. I noticed photos where her smile never quite reached her eyes. She was beautiful in a different way than Elena. Where Elena was all sharp angles and calculated glamour, Victoria had a softer quality. Dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, eyes the color of expensive chocolate, a smile that looked like it had forgotten how to be real. In her most recent photo posted 3 weeks ago, she stood alone on a beach somewhere, her hair whipping in the wind, staring out at the ocean with an expression I recognized. It was the look of someone who'd learned to be lonely in a crowded room. I stared at that photo for a long time, and something clicked into place. A plan so audacious, so perfectly balanced between justice and cruelty that I almost laughed. If Daniel Whitmore wanted to take my wife to dismantle my marriage while building his empire and maintaining his perfect public image, then I would return the favor. Not with anger, not with violence, but with something far more elegant. I would take his wife, not seduce her, nothing so crude or predictable. No, I would do something far more dangerous. I would actually see her, know her, understand her in ways her husband clearly didn't. I would offer her what Daniel had offered Elena. The feeling of mattering, of being alive, of being more than just a wife. And when it was done, when the fallout came, I would make sure Daniel Whitmore understood exactly what it felt like to be replaced. I closed my laptop and finished my scotch, feeling something like purpose settle into my bones. Outside, snow had started to fall. The first snow of the season, covering everything in white, clean, fresh, like the world resetting itself. Tomorrow, I would start my research. I would learn everything about Victoria Whitmore, her patterns, her interests, her weaknesses. I would find a way into her orbit that seemed natural, coincidental. I would be patient, meticulous. I would build this carefully, brick by brick, the way I built buildings with intention and precision. But tonight, I sat in the quiet of my ending marriage and let myself feel the cold clarity of someone who'd found their purpose. The snow fell heavier, muffling the sounds of the city, and in that silence, I began to plan my resurrection. The law offices of Morrison and Price occupied the 34th floor of a building I'd helped design 5 years ago. There was a certain poetry in that, conducting the dissolution of my marriage in a structure I'd created, watching my life be divided into assets and liabilities beneath ceilings I'd sketched in rooms where light fell through windows I'd positioned for maximum impact. Jeremy Morrison had been my lawyer since I'd started my firm. He was the kind of attorney who wore expensive suits but kept his sleeves rolled up, who billed by the hour but never made you feel like you were watching the meter run. When I called him the morning after Elena's confession, he'd cleared his schedule immediately. "Marcus," he said now, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk. "I've drawn up a preliminary assessment based on what you've told me. It's not pretty." I opened the folder. Numbers swam across the page. The house, our savings accounts, Elena's stock options, my retirement fund, the vacation property in Vermont we'd bought 3 years ago and visited exactly twice. 7 years of accumulated life reduced to spreadsheets and estimated values. New York is an equitable distribution state, Jeremy continued, steepling his fingers. Which means the court divides marital property fairly, not necessarily equally, given that Elena's income has exceeded yours for the past 2 years, and there's no prenup. I could walk away with less than half potentially, though the affair could work in your favor, depending on how vindictive you want to be. He paused. How vindictive do you want to be? I thought about that. The old Marcus, the one who'd existed 4 weeks ago, would have said he wanted to be fair, civilized, mature about the whole thing. But the old Marcus had also been blind to his wife's infidelity, complicit in his own cuckolding through sheer obliviousness. The new Marcus had different priorities. "I want what I'm entitled to," I said carefully. "Nothing more, nothing less. I'm not interested in destroying her financially. I just want out clean and clear." Jeremy studied me with the expression of a man who'd seen too many divorces to believe in clean and clear. "Most people in your position want blood." "I'm not most people." "No," he said slowly. "I don't suppose you are, though I have to ask Marcus, and feel free to tell me it's none of my business, but you seem remarkably calm about all this. Your wife of 7 years just told you she's been sleeping with her boss and wants a divorce. Most men would be falling apart." I was going to say visibly angry. I smiled and it felt like a foreign expression on my face. Something borrowed from a stranger. Anger is expensive, Jeremy. It clouds judgment. Makes you do stupid things. I learned a long time ago that the best revenge is architecture. He raised an eyebrow. Architecture? Building something better than what you had before. Creating something that lasts longer than the pain that inspired it. I stood, buttoning my coat. "How long until we can file? If you're serious about keeping this civil, I can have preliminary papers ready by next week, though. I'd recommend waiting until next week is fine. Send me the documents when they're ready." I left his office and stepped into the cold November air, watching people rush past on their lunch breaks, all of them carrying their own invisible burdens. Somewhere in this city, Elena was probably at her desk, pretending to work while texting Daniel. Somewhere, Daniel Whitmore was in a corner office running his empire and my wife simultaneously, believing he'd won some kind of prize. They had no idea what was coming. I pulled out my phone and opened the research document I'd been building. Over the past week, I'd learned more about Victoria Whitmore than most people knew about their own spouses. She wasn't just the trophy wife of a tech CEO. She was a former curator at the Museum of Modern Art, forced to give up her career when Daniel's company went public and required a full-time society wife. She sat on the boards of 3 charities, volunteered at a literacy program in Brooklyn, and had a master's in art history from Columbia. She also, according to a carefully worded profile in Manhattan Magazine from 6 months ago, felt deeply fulfilled by her philanthropic work, even if it meant setting aside her curatorial ambitions. The language of polite surrender. I recognized it because I'd used similar phrases myself when people asked how I felt about Elena's meteoric rise, while my own firm stayed comfortably small and sustainable. I'm happy for her success. I'd say someone has to keep the home fires burning. Both of us, it seemed, had become experts at lying about our own eraser. Victoria's Instagram showed a woman who attended the right events, wore the right clothes, smiled the right smiles, but there were cracks if you knew where to look. Photos of art exhibitions she attended alone. Check-ins at museums on weekday afternoons when most society wives were at lunch. A quote she'd shared 2 months ago from Virginia Woolf. Lock up your libraries if you like, but there is no gate, no lock, no bolt that you can set upon the freedom of my mind. A woman feeling caged. A woman hungry for something her gilded life couldn't provide. Perfect. My phone buzzed. A text from Elena. I've moved most of my things out. Left your grandmother's china set in the photo albums. Thought you'd want those. My lawyer will contact yours next week. No apology, no second thoughts, just logistics and the division of memory. I deleted the message without responding. Instead, I opened a different app, one I downloaded 3 days ago after extensive research into Victoria's patterns. It was called Art Connect, a social platform for art enthusiasts to discuss exhibitions, share recommendations, and organize viewing groups for gallery openings. Victoria Whitmore was an active member under the username Victoria A. Mama. She posted thoughtful critiques of new exhibitions, engaged in discussions about contemporary installation art, and occasionally organized small viewing groups for lesser-known galleries in Chelsea and the Lower East Side. Her most recent post from yesterday. Anyone interested in the new Rothko retrospective at Pace? Thinking of going Thursday evening? Always better to experience color field painting with others who appreciate the emotional architecture of it. Emotional architecture. The phrase struck me both for its pretension and its accuracy. Rothko had built cathedrals out of color, spaces designed to make you feel rather than think. I'd always admired that. The idea that you could construct emotion the way you constructed buildings with intention and precision. I created an account. Username Marcus Architect. Profile picture. A photo of me at a building site. Thoughtful and professional. Nothing try hard about it. Bio. Architect by trade. Student of space and light. Believer in the emotional geometry of well-designed environments. Then I commented on her post. Rothko understood that architecture isn't just about physical space. It's about creating environments for contemplation. Would love to join if there's room. Always fascinating to see his work with people who understand the structural component of his compositions. I hit send and felt something like electricity run through me. Not guilt. I'd moved past guilt somewhere around the second week of knowing about Elena's affair. This was something different. Anticipation. The feeling of a plan beginning to move from blueprint to foundation. My phone buzzed within minutes. Victoria, a mom. Love that perspective. Most people focus purely on the emotional without recognizing the architectural precision of his color blocks. Absolutely. Join us planning to meet at the gallery entrance at 6 p.m. Thursday. Fair warning, I tend to spend at least an hour in front of each major piece. Patience required. I smiled. Marcus, architect. Patience is the foundation of appreciation. See you Thursday. 3 days. 3 days to prepare, to research, to ensure that when we met, I would be exactly what she needed me to be. Not a seducer, not a player, just a man who saw her, really saw her in ways her husband had stopped seeing her years ago. I spent those 3 days becoming an expert on Rothko. I read critical essays and artist biographies. I visited the MoMA to stand in front of his work and understand what drew Victoria to these massive canvases of color. I learned about his suicide, his depression, his belief that his paintings were dramas meant to evoke profound human emotions. I also learned everything I could about Victoria herself. Not just the public information, but the traces she left across the internet like breadcrumbs. A blog she'd abandoned 3 years ago, where she'd written eloquently about the intersection of art and memory. A YouTube channel with only 2 videos, both from 4 years ago, where she'd given tours of MoMA exhibitions with the kind of passion that made you understand why she'd chosen this career. In one video, she stood in front of a Pollock drip painting, and her whole face transformed. People think this is chaos, she said, gesturing at the canvas. But look closer. There's intention in every splatter, structure, and the apparent randomness. Pollock didn't just throw paint. He built these pieces like symphonies. Each gesture deliberate. It's not chaos. It's controlled passion. I watched that video 5 times. Studying not the art, but her. The way her hands moved when she talked, like she was conducting music only she could hear. The way her voice softened when she described technique grew stronger when she defended the artist's vision. The way she looked at the painting like it was a person she loved. This was not a woman who'd given up her career willingly. This was a woman who'd been convinced to trade her passion for security. Her voice for a social position. And now she was spending her days at charity luncheons and her nights at her husband's business dinners, slowly disappearing behind the role of Mrs. Daniel Whitmore. I understood that disappearance. I'd been vanishing myself for years, becoming smaller and quieter as Elena's star rose. The understanding husband, the supportive partner, the man who didn't mind that his wife was her boss because, hey, at least someone found her exciting. Thursday arrived cold and clear. I dressed carefully, dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, a wool coat that looked expensive without being ostentatious. The goal was to appear successful but not showy, cultured but not pretentious. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in her world without trying too hard to impress. The Pace Gallery stood in Chelsea, all glass and white walls, the kind of space designed to make art the only thing that mattered. I arrived 15 minutes early and bought the exhibition catalog, studying it in the lobby like I was preparing for an exam. At 5:58 p.m., she walked in. Victoria Whitmore was more striking in person than in photographs. She wore a charcoal dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, paired with a burgundy coat and simple jewelry. But it was her face that caught me, intelligent eyes, a mouth that looked like it was used to holding back opinions, and something in her posture that suggested both confidence and careful constraint. She was alone. I watched her scan the small group gathered near the entrance. 4 other people all looking at their phones. When her eyes landed on me, there was a flicker of assessment, quick and thorough. Then she smiled, and I understood why Daniel had married her. It wasn't just beauty. It was the way that smile made you feel like you'd earned something valuable. "Marcus," she said, approaching with her hand extended. "I'm Victoria. I recognize you from your profile picture." Her handshake was firm, professional. Up close, I could see fine lines at the corners of her eyes. The kind that came from years of smiling at things that didn't make you happy. "Thank you for organizing this," I said. "I've been wanting to see this exhibition properly. Went through it quickly last month, but it deserves more attention." "You've been before." Something in her voice sharpened with interest. "What did you think?" "Overwhelming in the best way, like standing inside emotion rather than looking at it, but I felt like I was rushing, trying to see everything at once. Sometimes you need to sit with discomfort to really understand it." She studied me for a moment, and I saw the exact instant she decided I wasn't just another dilettante. That's exactly it. Most people want art to be comfortable, to give them easy answers. But Rothko's work requires you to surrender to the uncertainty. The other members of her group approached 2 women in their 50s who looked like they collected art for investment purposes, and a young man who immediately started talking about color theory in a way that suggested he'd just discovered it. Victoria listened politely, but I could see her attention fragmenting. We moved into the exhibition space as a group, but within 20 minutes, the natural separation occurred. The investors moved quickly through the rooms, checking off paintings like items on a shopping list. The young man got absorbed in taking photos for Instagram, and Victoria and I found ourselves standing in front of a massive canvas of deep reds and blacks alone in a room designed for solitude. "No, 1960, she said softly. "One of his last major works before his death. You can feel it the way the darkness is consuming the red. He knew he was drowning. Or maybe he was learning to breathe underwater." I said, "Sometimes what looks like drowning is just a different way of existing." She turned to look at me. "Really, look at me." And I felt the weight of her attention. "That's an optimistic reading." "Is it?" I think Rothko knew exactly what he was doing. He was building spaces for people to bring their own meaning. If we see drowning, maybe that says more about us than about him. A small smile played at her lips. "You sound like you've spent time thinking about this." "I spend a lot of time thinking about how space affects emotion. Occupational hazard of being an architect." "What kind of architecture?" "Residential, mostly custom homes, some commercial projects. I like the intimate scale, designing spaces where people actually live, not just work or visit. There's something about creating the container for someone's daily life that feels significant." We moved through the exhibition slowly, and I noticed how she positioned herself in front of each painting, not straight on, but slightly to the side, as if approaching the art from an angle. When I asked about it, she laughed. "Old curator habit. You see different things when you shift your perspective. The way light hits the canvas changes. Colors reveal undertones. Most people plant themselves dead center and think they're seeing everything, but they're only getting one version of the truth. And you prefer multiple versions. I prefer acknowledging that there are multiple versions. Truth is positional. It changes depending on where you're standing." We were alone in the final room, a space dominated by a massive canvas of deep burgundy and black. The silence felt deliberate, constructed. I could hear her breathing, slow and measured. "Can I ask you something?" she said, still looking at the painting. "Why did you really want to come today?" The question surprised me with its directness. I'd expected small talk, gradual building of rapport, but Victoria Whitmore, it seemed, wasn't interested in the usual social choreography. "Honestly," I said, "I'm going through a divorce. My wife told me 2 weeks ago that she's been having an affair with her boss, and I realized that I'd been living in a very small space for a very long time, metaphorically speaking. I needed to remember what it felt like to experience something larger than my own anger." I watched her face carefully. The confession was calculated, vulnerable enough to be human, specific enough to be believable, and designed to create a sense of intimacy through shared pain. What I didn't expect was the way her expression shifted not to pity, but to recognition. "I'm sorry," she said. I'm sorry you're going through that. Thank you, though. I'm finding that sometimes things have to fall apart before you realize they were barely holding together in the first place." She nodded slowly and I saw her hand move unconsciously to her wedding ring. Twisting it the way Elena used to twist hers, a gesture of discomfort, of doubt. "My husband is having an affair, too," she said quietly. And the words fell into the space between us like stones into still water. "I don't have proof, but I know. You always know, don't you? Even when you pretend you don't." And there it was. The crack in the perfect facade. The truth she'd been carrying alone, probably for months, with no one to tell because admitting it would mean admitting that her carefully constructed life was a performance. I turned to face her fully. "Yes," I said. "You always know." We stood there in the silence of Rothko's final room. Two people who'd been betrayed. Two people who understood what it meant to be erased by someone else's desire. Around us, the deep red walls seemed to pulse with a heartbeat that wasn't our own. "Would you like to get coffee?" I asked. "I feel like we've both earned something stronger than gallery wine." She smiled, a real smile this time. One that reached her eyes. "Yes, God. Yes. I know a place nearby that stays open late. They have excellent bourbon." As we left the gallery together, stepping out into the cold November evening, I felt the foundation of my plan settling into place. Not through seduction, not through manipulation, but through something far more dangerous. Genuine connection. Victoria Whitmore was lonely. She was brilliant. She was trapped in a marriage to a man who was at this very moment probably in bed with my wife. And I was going to show her exactly what it felt like to be seen again. The bar Victoria chose was the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing a narrow door between a vintage bookshop and a closed dry cleaner. No sign, just a brass number plate that read 237. Inside, it opened into a space that felt like a secret. Exposed brick walls lined with leather-bound books, Edison bulbs casting warm pools of light, and a bar made from reclaimed wood that looked like it had stories embedded in every grain. "I come here when I need to think," Victoria said, leading me to a corner booth half hidden behind a bookshelf. "Daniel doesn't know about it. It's not the kind of place he'd appreciate." The way she said his name, Daniel, not my husband, told me everything I needed to know about the distance between them. A waitress appeared, young and efficient, with the kind of face that suggested she was between graduate programs and using this job to fund her real passion. Victoria ordered a bourbon. "Neat." I did the same. "So," Victoria said once the waitress had disappeared. "Tell me about your wife." The directness was becoming familiar. Victoria Whitmore. I was learning. Didn't waste time on pleasantries when real conversation was available. It was refreshing and dangerous in equal measure. "What do you want to know? Why did you marry her?" I thought about that, not about what would sound good, but about the actual truth. Because I had the sense that Victoria could smell a lie from across the room. And more importantly, I was tired of lying because she made me feel like I was building something that mattered. I said Elena was as brilliant, ambitious. She had this way of seeing potential in everything, including me. When I met her, I was just another architect grinding away at someone else's firm, designing strip malls and restaurant renovations. She looked at my sketches and told me I was wasting my talent on other people's mediocrity. 6 months later, I'd started my own firm. She pushed you. She believed in me. There's a difference. I paused as the waitress returned with our drinks. Or at least I thought there was. Now I wonder if she just saw me as another project, something to improve and optimize and eventually outgrow. Victoria lifted her glass, studying the amber liquid like it held answers. "Daniel chose me because I looked good in photographs. Because I came from the right family, because I understood how to navigate the social architecture of his world." She took a sip and I watched her throat work as she swallowed. He needed a wife who could throw dinner parties and sit on charity boards and smile at investors. I needed God. I don't even remember what I thought I needed. Security, status, permission to stop fighting so hard. You gave up your career. Her eyes snapped to mine. How did you know that? You mentioned you were a curator. Past tense. And there's a way you talk about art like someone who's been exiled from a country they still consider home. She set down her glass with exaggerated care. You're observant. Occupational hazard. I spend my days noticing how people move through spaces, how environments affect behavior. You learn to read the signs. And what signs are you reading now? I leaned back, considering her. In the low light, she looked younger than her 42 years, but also more fragile somehow, like fine porcelain that had developed invisible cracks. I'm reading a woman who's been making herself smaller for years. Who's been editing her own thoughts before she speaks them, who comes to art galleries alone because it's the only place she can remember who she used to be. Victoria's expression didn't change, but I saw her fingers tighten around her glass. You don't know me well enough to make those assessments. You're right. I apologize. That was presumptuous. No. She shook her head and something in her face softened. No, you're not wrong. It's just strange to have someone name it so precisely. Most people look at my life and see nothing but privilege. The penthouse, the charity galas, the vacation home in Aspen. They think I have everything. But you gave up the thing that mattered most. Yes. The word came out like a confession. I was good at it. You know, curation. I had an eye for emerging artists. I could walk into a studio and know immediately if the work would resonate. I could build exhibitions that told stories that created dialogues between pieces that had never been in conversation before. It was like conducting an orchestra except with visual language instead of music. The passion in her voice was raw, unguarded. This was the Victoria from those YouTube videos. The one who spoke about art like it was oxygen. What happened? I asked, though I thought I knew. Daniel's company went public. Suddenly, we were worth $200 million on paper. And I was married to a CEO who needed a specific kind of wife. Not a working curator who spent her weekends in Brooklyn studios and came home with paint on her clothes. He needed someone who could host dinners for investors, who could make small talk with board members' wives, who could be photographed for magazine spreads about successful couples. So, you quit. So, I was strongly encouraged to redirect my energies toward philanthropic endeavors. Her voice had taken on a mimicking quality, like she was quoting someone. Probably Daniel. He made it sound so reasonable. Why work 60-hour weeks at the museum when I could be on the board of 3 different charities? Why exhaust myself building exhibitions when I could be funding emerging artists through our foundation? But it's not the same. It's not even close. She finished her bourbon and signaled for another. Writing checks isn't creating. Attending fundraisers isn't building something with your own hands. I sit in meetings and approve grants and smile for photographs, and every day I feel myself disappearing a little more. The rawness of it struck me. This wasn't the careful social performance of a society wife. This was a woman who'd been holding this inside for years. And suddenly, the dam had broken. When did you know he was having an affair? I asked. Victoria's second bourbon arrived. She took a long sip before answering. 6 months ago. We were at a company dinner. One of those interminable things where everyone drinks too much and pretends to enjoy each other's company. I went to find Daniel because the CFO's wife wanted to discuss some charity event. And I found him in his office with his VP of brand strategy. She paused. Elena, right? That's your wife's name. The confirmation hit me like a punch, even though I'd known. Hearing it spoken aloud, having the affair verified by the other betrayed spouse made it viscerally real in a new way. Yes, I said. Elena, they weren't having sex. Not then, at least. But I saw the way he looked at her, the way she laughed at something, he said, touching his arm, and I knew. You can tell the difference between normal flirtation and something that's already crossed a line. It's in the body language, the casual intimacy. Did you confront him? No. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I went back to the dinner party and smiled and made small talk about fundraising strategies. I went home and slept next to him and pretended I hadn't seen anything. I've been pretending for 6 months. Why? The question hung between us heavy with implications. Why do any of us stay in marriages that have died? Why do we perform normally when everything underneath is rotting? Because leaving would mean admitting I made a mistake. Victoria said quietly. Admitting that I gave up my career, my identity, my entire sense of self for a man who can't even be bothered to hide his affairs competently. It would mean that my mother was right when she told me not to marry him, that my friends were right when they said I was throwing my life away, That I wasted the last 12 years building something that was hollow from the beginning. I understood that the sunk cost fallacy of failed marriages. We stay because leaving means admitting the investment was worthless, that all those years were a mistake. It's easier to pretend the foundation is solid than to acknowledge you've been living in a house of cards. What about you? Victoria asked, turning the question back. Why haven't you confronted your wife? You said she told you 2 weeks ago. But you seem very controlled about it. Most men would be destroying her car, screaming in public, making dramatic gestures that would only make me look pathetic. I shook my head. I spent the first week after I found out wanting to burn everything down. But anger is expensive. It costs you your dignity, your clarity, your ability to think strategically. So, you're thinking strategically. It wasn't a question. I'm thinking about what I want my life to look like on the other side of this. And I realized that getting revenge in obvious ways, slashing tires, sending angry emails, making scenes that just makes me the villain in her story, the jealous husband who couldn't handle her success. I don't want to be that character. Victoria studied me over the rim of her glass. So, what character do you want to be? The one who builds something better. The one who doesn't just survive, but actually lives. The one who proves that her leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me. By coming to art galleries and drinking bourbon with strangers. By remembering what it feels like to have a conversation about something that matters. By expanding my world instead of shrinking into my anger. By refusing to let her betrayal define my next chapter. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. That's admirably philosophical. It's admirably full of, I said. And she laughed, a real laugh, surprised and genuine. I'm angry as hell. I'm hurt and humiliated. And some days I wake up wanting to destroy everything they've built together. But I also know that giving into that anger would only destroy me. So I'm channeling it into something more productive. Like what? I met her eyes. Like finding people who understand. Like building new connections that remind me I'm more than just the husband who got cheated on. Like proving to myself that I can still surprise myself. The air between us had shifted. We'd moved past small talk, past the careful social dance of strangers. We were in the territory of real conversation now. The kind that only happens when two people recognize something broken in each other. Can I tell you something? Victoria said. Something I've never told anyone. Of course. I'm glad he's having an affair. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them inside for months. I know that makes me sound terrible, but I'm glad because it gives me permission to stop pretending. It gives me an exit that doesn't make me the bad guy. I can leave now and everyone will understand. The poor wife whose husband cheated. No one has to know that I was already gone long before he ever touched another woman. The confession was so honest, so raw that I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't the society wife or the curator or the charity board member. This was just Victoria, a woman who'd been suffocating in a beautiful cage and had finally found the door. That doesn't make you terrible, I said. It makes you human, does it? Sometimes I think I'm a coward. That I should have left years ago when I first realized I was disappearing. But I stayed because it was easier. Because his money meant I didn't have to struggle. Because being Mrs. Daniel Whitmore opened doors that being Victoria Ashford never could. And now those doors lead to rooms I don't want to be in anymore. We sat in silence for a moment, and I felt the weight of what we were building here. Not a flirtation, not a rebound, but something more dangerous. A genuine understanding between two people who'd been betrayed in exactly the same way by exactly the same people. I should probably go, Victoria said. But she didn't move. Daniel will wonder where I am. Will he? No, probably not. He's likely working late or pretending to work late while he's actually with Elena. The name sat between us like a third person at the table. My wife and her husband somewhere in this city building their affair while we sat here drinking bourbon and sharing confessions. Can I ask you something potentially inappropriate? I said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. We're past the point of appropriate, I think. Do you want to stop him? The affair. Duh. She considered the question seriously. No. I want to be free of him, but I also want him to understand what he's losing. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. What about you? Do you want Elena back? God, no. The certainty in my voice surprised even me. I want her to live with the consequences of her choices. I want her to build a life with Daniel and slowly realize that she traded substance for flash. I want her to wake up one day and understand that she destroyed something real for something that only looks good in photographs. Victoria smiled. And there was something fierce in it. You're not as philosophical as you pretend to be. No one is. She finished her bourbon and set down the glass with finality. I should really go, but I'd like to do this again. If you're interested, I'm very interested. There's a gallery opening next Friday. Emerging artist from Brooklyn does these incredible installations with light and shadow. Very architectural, actually. You might appreciate it. I'd love to. We exchanged numbers, a simple transaction that felt weighted with significance. As we stood to leave, Victoria put her hand on my arm. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me, for listening, for not pretending this is anything other than what it is." "What is it?" I asked. She smiled. "I don't know yet, but I think I want to find out." Outside, the November night had grown colder. We stood on the sidewalk, and I could see her breath forming clouds in the air. A town car pulled up her driver, presumably summoned while we'd been inside. "Good night, Marcus," she said. "Good night, Victoria." I watched her car disappear into Manhattan traffic, and I felt something like triumph settle into my bones. Not because I'd seduced her. I hadn't. Not really, but because I'd done something more dangerous. I'd made her feel seen, understood, valued, and that I was learning was a far more powerful weapon than anything crude or obvious. My phone buzzed. A text from Elena. "Lawyer says we should schedule mediation for next month. Can you do the 15th? I looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back. "The 15th works. Have a good evening, Elena." Polite, civil, completely devoid of the rage she probably expected. Then I pulled up my thread with Victoria and sent a simple message. "Thank you for tonight. Looking forward to Friday." Her response came within seconds. "Me too. Sleep well, Marcus." I walked home through the cold November streets, past restaurants where couples shared meals and bars where friends laughed over drinks, and I felt like I was walking towards something instead of away from it. The game had begun. Not a game of seduction or revenge, but something more elegant, a game of truth and connection, of seeing and being seen. Daniel Whitmore had taken my wife, and slowly, carefully, with patience and precision, I was going to show him what it felt like to lose something irreplaceable. Not his wife's body. That would be too easy, too predictable. Her soul, her attention, her belief that she mattered. I was going to give Victoria Whitmore back to herself, and in doing so, I was going to take everything from him. The week between Bourbon Confessions and the gallery opening passed in a strange state of suspension. I moved through my days with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, meeting with clients, drafting designs, filing divorce papers that felt less like an ending and more like permission to begin something new. Elena had moved out completely. Our house, my house now, though the lawyers were still arguing about it, felt different without her presence. Not emptier. Exactly. Cleaner, like removing clutter you didn't realize was weighing you down until it was gone. She'd taken her expensive coffee maker and her designer clothes, her collection of marketing books, and her framed magazine covers. She'd left the art we'd bought together, pieces I'd chosen that she'd never really liked, and the furniture for my grandmother. The division felt appropriate. She got the symbols of her success. I got the things with actual history. I spent the evenings researching. Not Victoria this time, but the artist whose opening we'd be attending. Sophia Chen, 32, MFA from Yale, known for installation pieces that played with light and architectural space. Her work had been described as hauntingly intimate and aggressively beautiful. The kind of contradictory praise that meant she was doing something interesting. I also researched Daniel Whitmore more thoroughly. Not just the public information, the Forbes profiles, and the TechCrunch articles, but the cracks in his perfect facade. A lawsuit from 3 years ago, settled quietly involving allegations of hostile work environment. An interview where he'd said his wife understood the sacrifices necessary for success. A photograph from a charity gala where Victoria stood 2 feet away from him, smiling at the camera while looking completely alone. The more I learned, the more I understood that Daniel Whitmore was a man who collected things, companies, status symbols, people. Elena was just his latest acquisition, younger, ambitious, hungry for the power he could provide. And Victoria had been the first acquisition, chosen for her pedigree and her ability to play the role he needed. Both women reduced to their utility. Both of us, their spouses, reduced to obstacles or footnotes. On Friday evening, I dressed with the same care I'd taken the previous week. Charcoal slacks, a navy sweater, a coat that looked expensive without screaming it. I studied myself in the mirror and saw a man who'd lost 20 pounds in the past month without trying, whose eyes had developed a sharpness they'd lacked before. Grief had carved something leaner out of me, something harder. The gallery was in Bushwick, occupying a converted warehouse that still had the bones of its industrial past. Inside, white walls soared 20 feet high, and Sophia Chen's installations filled the space with geometric patterns of light and shadow. Projectors cast moving images onto translucent screens suspended from the ceiling, creating layers of illumination that shifted as you walked through them. It was beautiful. It was also deeply unsettling the way the light never stayed still, the way you could never be certain what you were seeing was real or reflected. Victoria was already there when I arrived. She stood in front of a piece called Memory Palace, a maze of gauze screens onto which were projected images of empty rooms, doorways that led nowhere, windows that showed only more windows. She wore black, a simple dress that probably cost more than my car, but elegant in its restraint. Her hair was pulled back, exposing the line of her neck, and she'd foregone her wedding ring. I noticed that immediately, the absence of gold on her left hand. "Marcus," she said, turning as I approached. Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that suggested she'd been looking forward to this. "You made it. I wouldn't miss it. This is extraordinary, isn't it?" She gestured at the installation. "Sophia's exploring the architecture of memory, how we build internal spaces to house our past, and how those spaces are never stable, always shifting, always being rewritten." We walked through the maze of screens together and I noticed how the other gallery goers gave Victoria space. Not because they didn't recognize her, several did. I saw the double takes, but because she projected an aura that suggested she was here for the art, not for networking. "How was your week?" she asked as we emerged from Memory Palace into a room where light fractured through suspended prisms, creating rainbow patterns on the floor. "Productive. Signed my divorce papers. Met with 3 new clients. Started designing a house for a couple in Connecticut who actually seemed to like each other." She laughed. "Setting the bar high, I see. After what we've been through, mutual affection feels aspirational." I paused in front of a piece called Fault Lines, a floor installation of broken mirrors arranged to create the illusion of depth. "What about you?" "I hired a private investigator." The words came out casually, but I could hear the tension underneath to document Daniel's affair. "I thought if I'm going to do this actually leave, I should have evidence. Even though New York is no fault, it helps in the court of public opinion." And then it turns out he's been having multiple affairs, not just with Elena. There's also a junior associate at his firm, a consultant he hired 6 months ago, and apparently a recurring thing with someone he met at a conference in Singapore. She said it calmly, but I could see her jaw tighten. 12 years of marriage, and I was naive enough to think it was just one woman. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not surprised men like Daniel rarely stopped at one affair, but anger on Victoria's behalf. And something else, a recalculation. Elena wasn't special to him. She was just another acquisition. Another young, ambitious woman who thought she was different, who believed she'd won some kind of prize by catching the CEO's attention. She had no idea she was just rotating through his collection. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Don't be. It's clarifying. I spent months thinking I'd done something wrong. That if I'd been different somehow, he wouldn't have strayed. But this isn't about me at all. It's about him needing constant validation, constant conquest. I could have been perfect and it wouldn't have mattered. You deserve better than perfect. You deserve real." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and something passed between us. Not attraction exactly, though that was there too. Something deeper. Recognition, the understanding that we were both rebuilding ourselves from the rubble of marriages that had crumbled. "Come on," she said, taking my hand. "I want to show you my favorite piece." Her hand in mine felt significant. Not romantic, not yet, but intimate in a way that acknowledged we'd moved past strangers. We were becoming something else. Allies, confidants, 2 people constructing a new reality from the broken pieces of the old one. She led me to a smaller room at the back of the gallery. Inside, a single installation dominated the space. The weight of light, hundreds of glass orbs hung from nearly invisible wires, each containing a small LED that pulsed at different rhythms. The effect was mesmerizing, like standing inside a constellation surrounded by manufactured stars. "It's about how even beautiful things have weight," Victoria said softly. "How light itself exerts pressure. Nothing is ever truly weightless, even when it appears to be." We stood there in the dim room, surrounded by pulsing light, and I felt the truth of what she was saying. The beautiful facade of her marriage had weight. My relationship with Elena had had weight. Even this, whatever this was becoming between us, had weight. "I've been thinking," Victoria said, still holding my hand, "about what you said last week, about building something better, about refusing to let betrayal define your next chapter. And I want to do that, too. But I don't know how. I've spent so long being Mrs. Daniel Whitmore that I'm not sure who Victoria is anymore. Without the title, without the role, who am I?" The vulnerability in her voice made me turn to face her fully. In the pulsing light of the orbs, her face looked younger, more uncertain. This was the woman underneath the perfect exterior, the one who'd been erased over 12 years of playing a part. You're a woman who understands art well enough to stand in a room like this and explain why it matters. I said, you're someone who chose bourbon over champagne, truth over performance. You're whoever you decide to be, Victoria. The question is, who do you want to become? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked up at the suspended orbs, watching their asynchronous pulsing. And I saw something shift in her expression. Decision, resolution. I want to curate again, she said, not as a hobby or a philanthropic endeavor. Actually curate, build exhibitions, work with artists, get paint on my clothes, and spend weekends in studios. I want to remember what it feels like to create something that matters. So do it. It's not that simple. Daniel will fight me. Not because he cares about my career, but because it threatens the image. The CEO's wife isn't supposed to have her own ambitions. She's supposed to be decorative and supportive and content with being an accessory. Then don't tell him. Start small. Build it quietly until it's too substantial to tear down. She smiled. You make it sound possible. It is possible. I started my firm while working full-time for someone else. Nights and weekends for 2 years before I could afford to leave. It was exhausting, but it was mine. That mattered more than anything else. How do I even start? I thought about that. About the practical steps of reclaiming a career you'd abandoned. You still have contacts in the art world. Some, though I've been out for so long, I'm not sure they'd take me seriously. Then make them take you seriously. Find an emerging artist who needs an advocate. Someone whose work you believe in but who doesn't have gallery representation. Curate a small show independently. Rent a space. Build the exhibition yourself. Prove you can still do this. Her eyes lit up. Like a pop-up exhibition. Exactly. Low overhead, high impact. If it works, you've got momentum. If it doesn't, you've learned something and you try again. Either way, you're moving forward instead of staying frozen. You've thought about this. I've thought about a lot of things lately, mostly about how to build a life that's actually mine, not some compromised version that makes other people comfortable. Victoria squeezed my hand. Thank you for this, for seeing possibilities instead of just obstacles. That's what architects do. We look at empty space and imagine what could be built there. We stood there for a moment longer, surrounded by pulsing light, and I felt the weight she'd mentioned. This connection we were building had gravity. It was pulling us towards something that couldn't be easily categorized or controlled. Victoria, we both turned. A man approached 50's expensive suit. The kind of confident stride that suggested he owned things. He smiled at Victoria with the familiarity of old acquaintance. Richard Caldwell, Victoria said, and I heard her voice shift into her society wife register. Warmer but less genuine. I didn't know you were interested in installation art. I'm interested in investments, he said, glancing around the room. Sophia Chen's work is generating buzz. Thought I'd see what the fuss was about. His eyes moved to me. Richard Caldwell. I run an art advisory firm. Marcus Bennett, architect. We shook hands and I could feel him evaluating me, trying to place me in Victoria's social ecosystem. Friend, lover, business associate. Marcus has been educating me on the architectural elements of Sophia's work, Victoria said smoothly. The way she uses space and light to create emotional geometry. Fascinating. Richard's tone suggested it was anything but. Victoria, I've been meaning to reach out. I heard a rumor you might be getting back into curation. Any truth to that? I felt Victoria tense beside me. Where did you hear that art world gossip? You know how it is. Someone mentioned you'd been asking questions about available gallery spaces. He smiled. If you're serious about coming back, we should talk. I've got several clients looking for curators for private collections. I'll keep that in mind, Victoria said noncommittal. Enjoy the exhibition, Richard. It was a dismissal, politely delivered, but unmistakable. Richard took the hint, nodded at both of us, and drifted toward another installation. Private collections, Victoria said once he was out of earshot. Curating for rich people who want someone to tell them what art they should buy to impress their friends. That's not what I want. What do you want? To build something that matters. To work with artists who are creating because they have to, not because it's profitable. To curate exhibitions that change how people see the world, even if it's just for an hour. She turned to me. Is that naive? Am I too old to still believe in that kind of idealism? You're asking the wrong person. I'm the architect who turned down a partnership at a major firm because they wanted me to design identical luxury condos for the rest of my career. Idealism might be naive, but pragmatism is soul-crushing. She laughed, and the sound echoed in the small room. We're a pair, aren't we? Two middle-aged idealists trying to remember who we were before we started compromising. I prefer to think of us as people who are finally done compromising. Is that what we are? The question hung in the air between us, weighted with possibility. We were standing close now, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that suited her. Close enough that I could see the fine gold flecks in her brown eyes. I think we're people who understand each other, I said carefully. Who recognize something broken in each other and aren't afraid of it. What that becomes. I think we're still figuring that out. And if it becomes something that complicates everything, then we deal with complications. But at least we'll be dealing with them honestly, which is more than our spouses gave us. Victoria looked up at the pulsing orbs, and in their reflected light, I saw her face soften. I should tell you something. Daniel's company is having a holiday party in 3 weeks. Big event, investors, board members, all the important people. He always expects me to be there playing the perfect wife. She paused. I'm thinking of not going or of going and telling him I want a divorce in front of everyone. I haven't decided which would be more satisfying. Is there a third option? What do you mean? I thought about it, about Daniel Whitmore and his affairs. About Elena and her ambition. About the perfect public image they were both invested in maintaining. About how much damage could be done not with explosions but with carefully placed cracks. Go to the party, I said. Be the perfect wife one last time. Smile and charm and play your role flawlessly. Let them think everything's fine. Why? Because the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation. It's building something better while they're not paying attention. Let him be comfortable. Let him think he's won, that he has everything under control. And then when you're ready, when you've built your new life to the point where his opinion doesn't matter anymore, that's when you walk away. Victoria studied me for a long moment. That's cold. That's strategic. You've thought about this. Your own revenge. I mean, I've thought about a lot of things. I met her eyes, including the fact that Daniel's holiday party might be the perfect place to begin implementing some of those thoughts. Understanding dawned on her face. You want to come with me? I want to meet the man who's sleeping with my wife. I want to shake his hand and smile and let him think I'm just another guest. I want to see him and Elena together, playing their own perfect couple routine while knowing exactly what they're doing and having them have no idea that I know. That's cruel. Manipulative probably, but also deeply satisfying. Victoria's smile turned sharp. I can bring a guest. Daniel encourages it. Makes me look less like the neglected wife if I show up with company. He'll assume you're just some friend from the art world. He won't think twice about it. Perfect. Marcus. She put her hand on my chest and I could feel my heartbeat against her palm. What are we doing? Really? Honestly, I think we're giving each other permission to stop being victims, to take back some control, to remember what it feels like to be seen and valued. I covered her hand with mine. And maybe we're building something real in the process, something that isn't tainted by betrayal or compromise. Or maybe we're just two hurt people using each other to feel less broken. Maybe. Would that be so terrible? She considered that. No, I suppose it wouldn't. As long as we're honest about it, I'm always honest with you, Victoria. That's the whole point. We left the gallery together, stepping out into the cold December night. Brooklyn stretched around us, all industrial chic and converted warehouses, and I felt like we were standing at the edge of something significant. 3 weeks, Victoria said, until the party. Until we walk into Daniel's world and smile at him and Elena like we don't know they're destroying our marriages. 3 weeks. I should start planning what to wear. Something that makes me look devastating. You already look devastating. She smiled. You're good at this. The compliments that feel genuine because they are. I only say what's true. We stood on the sidewalk and I could see her breath forming clouds in the cold air. She looked beautiful and fierce and fragile all at once. A woman on the edge of becoming whoever she was going to be next. Good night, Marcus, she said. Good night, Victoria. I watched her car pull away and I felt something like anticipation settle into my bones. 3 weeks until I stood in Daniel Whitmore's penthouse, shook his hand, and began the careful work of showing him what it felt like to lose everything. 3 weeks to plan, to prepare, to sharpen myself into exactly the weapon this situation required. The game was accelerating, and I was ready. The mediation session was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room that felt designed to suppress emotion. Gray walls, gray carpet, a long table made of some wood composite material that looked expensive but had no soul. Even the coffee they served tasted gray, bitter, and forgettable, like the marriage we were here to dissolve. Elena sat across from me, flanked by her lawyer, a woman named Patricia Winters, who specialized in high net worth divorces and had a reputation for being ruthless in designer suits. Elena looked good. She always looked good, but there was a tightness around her eyes that suggested she wasn't sleeping well. Part of me, a small and petty part, was glad. My own lawyer, Jeremy Morrison, sat to my right, a folder thick with documentation in front of him. We'd spent the previous week preparing, going over every asset, every account, every piece of property we'd accumulated in 7 years of marriage. "Thank you all for coming," the mediator said. Her name was Susan Chen, and she had the calm, measured tone of someone who'd witnessed hundreds of marriages end in rooms exactly like this one. "I know this is difficult, but the goal today is to reach an equitable agreement that both parties can accept. Shall we begin with the primary residence?" What followed was 3 hours of the most civilized dismemberment I'd ever witnessed. We divided our lives with spreadsheets and calculators, reducing years of shared history to dollar amounts and percentage splits. The house would be sold. Proceeds divided 60-40 in Elena's favor because she'd contributed more to the down payment. The vacation property in Vermont would go to her entirely. I had no interest in keeping a place we'd barely used, and she claimed to have emotional attachment to it, though I suspected it was more about the property value. My retirement accounts would be split according to some formula I didn't fully understand, but Jeremy assured me was fair. Elena's stock options from Whitmore Industries, the company where she worked, where she'd met her lover, were considered marital property, but would stay with her, balanced against other assets I'd receive. The whole process felt like watching surgeons divide a corpse. Clinical, precise, bloodless. "What about the art collection?" Patricia asked, consulting her notes. "I'd like to keep most of it," I said. Elena never cared for any of the pieces except the abstract we bought in Miami. And that was more about the artist's reputation than the actual work. Elena's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Marcus. I appreciate art. You appreciate what art signals about your taste. There's a difference." I kept my voice even. "Matter of fact, take the Miami piece. I'll keep the rest." She looked like she wanted to argue, but Patricia put a hand on her arm. They had a brief whispered conversation, and I watched Elena's face cycle through emotions, anger, frustration, something that might have been hurt before settling back into careful neutrality. "Fine," she said. "The Miami piece and the photographs from our trip to Japan. Those hurt more than I expected. We bought those photographs together in Kyoto from a street artist who captured light through temple windows. I'd loved them, but I also understood the strategic value of concession." "Agreed." We moved through the remaining items with brutal efficiency. Furniture, kitchenware, books, electronics, all of it divided and catalogued like inventory in a warehouse. By the time we reached the final items, I felt hollowed out, as if the mediation had scooped away pieces of me along with the joint checking account and the dining room set. "I think we've made excellent progress," Susan said, making notes on her tablet. "I'll draft the preliminary agreement based on today's discussion and send it to both counsel for review. If everything looks acceptable, we can move toward filing the final papers." "How long?" Elena asked. Her voice sounded different. Smaller somehow, like she was beginning to understand what we were actually doing here. That this was real. "Final. Assuming no complications, you could be legally divorced within 90 days. 90 days, 3 months by spring, I would be unmarried. By spring, Elena would be free to pursue whatever future she imagined with Daniel Whitmore, and I would be what? Free, broken, rebuilt. I wasn't sure yet, but I was beginning to have ideas. "Thank you, Susan," Jeremy said, gathering his papers. "We'll be in touch." As we stood to leave, Elena caught my arm. "Marcus, can we talk just for a minute?" Patricia looked like she wanted to object, but Jeremy nodded to me. "I'll wait in the lobby." We stood in the hallway outside the conference room, and I realized this was the first time we'd been alone since the restaurant, since she'd told me she wanted a divorce, and I'd responded with calm instead of devastation. "You seem different," she said. "Divorce will do that." "That's not what I mean." She struggled for words. "You're handling this too well. It's unnerving." I almost laughed. "Would you prefer me to be falling apart, making scenes, begging you to stay?" "No. But this cold, calculating version of you it's not you, Marcus. Maybe it's who I needed to become. Maybe the version of me you married was too accommodating, too willing to make myself smaller so you could shine brighter." She flinched. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair, Elena. Fair would have been you telling me you were unhappy before you started sleeping with your boss. Fair would have been you having the courage to end our marriage before starting a new relationship. Fair would have been a lot of things that didn't happen. I know you're right. I handled this terribly." She looked down at her hands, manicured, perfect. "No longer wearing her wedding ring, but I need you to understand that this wasn't about you. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm aware this was about you wanting something I couldn't give you. Power, excitement, whatever Daniel Whitmore represents. It's not like that, isn't it?" I leaned against the wall, studying her. Tell me something, Elena. When you're with him, do you feel like you matter? Like you're special? Or do you ever wonder if you're just another acquisition for a man who collects beautiful things? Her eyes flashed with anger. You don't know anything about my relationship with Daniel. I know he's married. I know he's 45 years old and you're 32. I know he has a pattern of affairs with younger women who work for him. I know his wife is a former museum curator who gave up her career to support his. And now he's trading her in for a newer model. How do you? She stopped. Realization dawning. You've been researching him. I've been educating myself about the man my wife left me for. It seemed prudent. I pushed off the wall. Enjoy the holiday party at his company next week. I hear it's quite the event. I started to walk away, but her voice stopped me. Marcus, wait. How did you know about the party? I turned back and I let myself smile. I pay attention, Elena. I always have. You just never noticed. I left her standing in the hallway and I could feel her eyes on my back as I walked toward the elevator. Jeremy was waiting in the lobby checking his phone. How'd it go? He asked. She's starting to realize I'm not the man she married. Is that a good thing? I think so. The man she married would have let her walk all over him. Would have signed whatever papers she wanted, taken whatever settlement she offered, and spent the next decade wondering what he did wrong. I pressed the button for the elevator. I'm not that man anymore. No, Jeremy said thoughtfully. I don't suppose you are. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for Daniel Whitmore's holiday party with the same meticulous attention I brought to architectural projects, research, planning, consideration of every angle, every possible outcome. I learned everything I could about Whitmore Industries, the company Daniel had built from a small software firm into a tech giant worth billions. I studied his public appearances, watched interviews, read profiles. I learned how he spoke, how he presented himself, what mattered to him. Control, image, legacy. These were the pillars of Daniel Whitmore's identity. He wanted to be seen as a titan of industry, a visionary, a man who built empires. His personal life was carefully curated to support that image. The beautiful wife from Old Money, the penthouse in Tribeca, the memberships at the right clubs. Elena fit into that narrative perfectly. Young, ambitious, successful in her own right. Dating her or whatever they were doing enhanced his image as a powerful man who could attract the best. She probably thought she was using him to advance her career, to access power and influence. She couldn't reach on her own. Neither of them understood they were using each other. Building a relationship on ambition rather than anything real. It would collapse eventually, but that would take time. I didn't have time. And more importantly, I didn't want to just wait for their relationship to fail. I wanted to accelerate it, to plant seeds of doubt that would grow into cracks that would shatter everything they were building. But first, I needed to meet him. To look Daniel Whitmore in the eye and let him see me as just another guest at his party. Harmless, forgettable, not a threat. Victoria and I spoke every few days, phone calls that started as check-ins and evolved into long conversations about art and architecture, about our failing marriages, and our plans for afterward. She told me about the artist she was considering for her pop-up exhibition. I told her about a project. I was designing a house for a couple in Connecticut who wanted something that captured light the way a prism captures rainbows. We didn't talk much about the party. It hung between us like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and electric. The night before the event, she called me. I'm nervous, she said without preamble. About tomorrow, about bringing you into Daniel's world. About what happens when you see him and Elena together? About she trailed off. About what this means. I finished for her. Yes. I was in my home office surrounded by blueprints and sketches. Through the window, I could see snow beginning to fall. The third snowfall of the season, covering the city in white, clean, fresh, deceptive. Victoria, we don't have to do this. If you're not ready, it's not about being ready. It's about being terrified that once we start this, whatever this is, we can't go back. That we're crossing a line that will change everything. We've already crossed the line. The moment we sat in that bar and told each other the truth about our marriages, we crossed it. Tomorrow is just making it visible. And you're okay with that, with whatever comes after. I thought about Elena in the mediation room dividing our lives into assets and liabilities. I thought about Daniel Whitmore collecting affairs like other men collected watches. I thought about Victoria, brilliant and erased, trying to remember who she was before she became someone's wife. I'm more than okay with it. I said I'm ready to stop being invisible, to stop accommodating, to start building something that's actually mine, even if it's messy. Especially if it's messy. Perfect things are boring, Victoria. They're fragile. Messy things have character, strength, room to grow. She laughed softly. When did you become a philosopher? Around the same time, my wife told me she'd been her boss for 4 months. Betrayal gives you clarity, does it? Because I still feel like I'm fumbling in the dark. Then let me be your light tomorrow night. Come to the party with me. Introduce me to your husband. Let me shake his hand and smile and be exactly the kind of harmless nobody he expects. And when it's over, when we've played our roles perfectly, we'll leave together and you'll remember what it feels like to have someone actually see you. Silence on the other end. Then what should I wear? Something that makes you feel powerful. Something that reminds you who you were before you started shrinking yourself to fit his life. I have just the thing. It's red. Daniel hates it. Says it's too bold, too attention-seeking. Perfect. Wear the red, Marcus. Yes. Thank you for this, for giving me permission to stop being who he needs me to be. You don't need my permission, Victoria. You never did, but you're welcome anyway. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time watching the snowfall. Tomorrow night, I would walk into Daniel Whitmore's penthouse. I would see Elena on his arm playing the role of his girlfriend or mistress or whatever she thought she was. I would watch them smile and touch and pretend they were something special. And I would feel nothing. Or at least I would show nothing, because the real play wasn't tomorrow night. Tomorrow was just reconnaissance. The real play would come later, when I'd learned enough about Daniel to understand exactly where to apply pressure. When Victoria had rebuilt enough of herself to walk away without looking back. When Elena had invested enough in her fantasy with Daniel that shattering it would actually cost her something. I was building this carefully, the way I build houses. Foundation first, structure, support beams. Only then the aesthetic details, the finishing touches that made it look effortless. Tomorrow I would lay another piece of foundation. I pulled out my phone and texted Victoria. Pick you up at 7. Her response came immediately. I'll be ready. Red dress and all. I smiled and returned to my blueprints. The Connecticut house was coming together beautifully. All light and angles. Spaces that flowed into each other naturally. A house for people who actually loved each other, who wanted to build a life together. I wouldn't have that. My marriage was ending in mediation rooms and divided assets. But I could build something else, something that mattered. I could build the kind of revenge that looked like resurrection. The next evening, I stood in front of my mirror and adjusted my tie charcoal gray silk that Elena had bought me 2 Christmases ago. I'd almost thrown it out in a fit of symbolic purging, but then decided against it. Wearing something she'd given me to the party where I'd meet her lover felt appropriately ironic. My phone buzzed. Victoria, driver's downstairs. Ready when you are. I took one last look at myself. The man in the mirror looked different than the one who'd sat in that restaurant a month ago, hearing his wife ask for a divorce. Leaner, sharper, harder somehow, but in a way that felt earned rather than bitter. This was the new Marcus, the one who planned instead of reacted, who built instead of crumbled. I grabbed my coat and headed down. Victoria was waiting in the car, a black sedan with a driver who knew how to be invisible. She looked stunning. The red dress was a column of silk that hugged her body without being obvious about it. Elegant and bold at the same time. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She wore minimal jewelry, just diamond studs and a simple bracelet. She looked like someone who'd remembered how to be powerful. You wore the red, I said, sliding in beside her. I wore the red. She smiled, but I could see nervousness in her eyes. Last chance to back out. Not a chance. The driver pulled into traffic, heading toward Tribeca, toward Daniel Whitmore's penthouse, toward whatever came next. Victoria took my hand, and we sat in silence as the city slid past the windows. 2 people heading into a party where our spouses would be playing couple with each other. 2 people about to smile and pretend and lay the groundwork for something that would eventually shatter everything. Marcus, Victoria said quietly. Yes. Whatever happens tonight, promise me we'll be honest with each other. No games between us. Save the performance for them. I promise. No games, just truth. She squeezed my hand. Then let's go meet my husband. The car pulled up to a glass tower in Tribeca. All modern angles and expensive views. A doorman opened Victoria's door and we stepped out into the cold December night. Above us, I could see lights blazing from the penthouse floor. The party was already in full swing. I offered Victoria my arm and she took it. Together, we walked into Daniel Whitmore's world. The game had begun. The elevator was all mirrors and brushed steel, rising so smoothly, you couldn't feel the movement. Just the numbers climbing 45, 46, 47, and our reflection multiplying into infinity. Victoria and I side by side, dressed for battle, disguised as celebration. He'll be in the center of everything, Victoria said, watching the numbers climb. Daniel always positions himself where he can see everyone, where everyone has to pass by him at some point. It's strategic, makes people come to him. Control through architecture, I said. I understand that, the elevator chimed. 48th floor. The doors slid open onto a private foyer. More marble, more mirrors, a massive flower arrangement that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Through double doors ahead, I could hear the party, conversation and laughter, the clink of glasses, music carefully selected to be sophisticated without being intrusive. A server appeared with a tray of champagne. Victoria took a glass but didn't drink. I did the same. Props for the performance. Ready? She asked. Absolutely. We walked through the doors together and I got my first look at Daniel Whitmore's world. The penthouse was exactly what I expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Manhattan that probably added $10 million to the property value. Minimalist furniture that looked uncomfortable but photogenic. Art on the walls chosen by advisors rather than passion. Everything was designed to impress. Nothing designed to comfort. There were perhaps 70 people scattered throughout the main room. All of them dressed in variations of expensive tech executives and their partners, board members, investors, the kind of people who measured success in zeros and thought influence was something you could buy. And there, exactly where Victoria said he'd be, standing in the center of it all like a sun around which everyone else orbited, Daniel Whitmore. He was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the kind of silver fox aesthetic that required expensive hair products and personal trainers, tailored suit, no tie that studied casualness that actually took more effort than formal dress. Handsome in a generic way, like he'd been designed by committee to appeal to the whitest demographic. And on his arm, laughing at something he just said, looking radiant and young and utterly comfortable in this world. Elena, my wife, almost ex-wife, the woman who'd shared my bed for 7 years and was now draped on another man like an accessory. She wore emerald green, her signature color, the one that made her eyes look more striking. Her hair was up, exposing the neck I used to kiss. She looked happy. That was the part that caught me. She looked genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. I felt Victoria's hand tighten on my arm. That's her, she said quietly. Your wife? Yes. She's beautiful. Yes. Are you okay? I turned to look at Victoria, at this woman who was trusting me enough to bring me into her home to expose her own pain and solidarity with mine. And I felt something settle. Not calm exactly, more like clarity. I'm perfect, I said. Let's go meet your husband. We moved through the crowd and I watched how people reacted to Victoria. Some nodded with recognition. Others looked curious about her companion. The women evaluated my suit, my watch, trying to place me in their hierarchy. The men assessed me as potential competition or potential irrelevance. Let them wonder. As we approached, Daniel noticed Victoria. His expression shifted surprise, then something calculating, then a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Victoria, he said, and his voice was exactly what I expected. Confident, commanding, used to being heard, you came and you brought a guest, Daniel. Victoria's voice had gone cool, professional. This is Marcus Bennett. Marcus, my husband, Daniel Whitmore. I extended my hand. Daniel's handshake was firm, performative. The grip of a man who'd read articles about power dynamics and practiced in mirrors. Marcus Bennett, he said like he was filing the name away. What do you do, Marcus? I'm an architect, residential, primarily, some commercial work. Ah, the single syllable managed to convey both interest and dismissal. Are you involved in the arts? Is that how you know Victoria? We met at a gallery opening. I've always appreciated how architecture and visual art inform each other. Victoria has been generous enough to educate me on the finer points of curation. Daniel's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't like that the idea of his wife spending time educating another man, even about something as innocent as art, possessiveness disguised as casual interest. How nice, he said, then turning slightly. Elena, come meet Victoria's friend. And there she was, my wife. Close enough that I could smell her perfume different from what she used to wear. Something heavier, muskier, chosen for him, probably. Elena, Daniel said, his hands settling on her lower back with casual ownership. This is Marcus Bennett. He's an architect. Elena's face went absolutely white. I watched it happen in slow motion. Recognition, shock, fear, and then a desperate attempt to smooth her features back into neutrality, but it was too late. Daniel had seen the reaction, even if he didn't understand it yet. Marcus, she said, and her voice came out strained. What a surprise. I smiled. Easy, friendly. Like we were old acquaintances running into each other at a party. Elena, small world. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You two know each other. We've met, I said vaguely, enjoying watching Elena try to calculate the safest response. Professional circles. You know how it is in New York. Everyone's connected somehow. Victoria, bless her, played it perfectly. What a coincidence, though. I suppose in the architecture and design world, paths must cross frequently. Frequently enough, Elena said, still trying to regain her equilibrium. Her eyes were doing complicated mathematics, trying to figure out what I was doing here. How much I knew what I was planning. I let her wonder. Well, Daniel said, already losing interest now that the moment of surprise had passed. Enjoy the party, Marcus. Victoria, we should talk later about the Grayson Foundation Gala. They want you to co-chair again. Of course, Victoria said smoothly. Later, we moved away, drifting into the crowd, and I could feel Elena's eyes following us. Victoria steered us toward the windows, away from the center of the room. That was, she started enlightening. I finished. Did you see her face? I saw both their faces. Daniel knows something's off, even if he doesn't know what. And Elena looked terrified. Good. Victoria studied me. You're enjoying this, shouldn't I be? For the first time in months, I'm not the one off balance. I'm not the one caught in a lie. I walked into my wife's lover's home, shook his hand, smiled at him, and he has no idea who I am or what I know. I took a sip of champagne. Yes, Victoria, I'm enjoying this very much. Just remember, the goal isn't just to make them uncomfortable. It's to take back our lives. I know, but that doesn't mean I can't enjoy watching them squirm along the way. We spent the next hour circulating. Victoria introduced me to people from her world, museum directors and gallery owners, collectors and artists. I was charming and interested and completely forgettable. Just another +1 at a party full of important people. But I was also watching, studying. I watched how Daniel worked the room, how he touched Elena possessive little gestures, his hand on her back, her shoulder, her waist, marking territory. I watched how Elena responded, leaning into him, laughing at his jokes, playing the role of the adoring younger woman who'd won the heart of a powerful man. I watched how Victoria navigated her own party like a stranger in her home. People greeted her politely but briefly, more interested in getting closer to Daniel. She was the CEO's wife, decorative but functionally invisible. And I watched how no one noticed the way Daniel's eyes lingered on a young woman from his marketing department. Or how he took a call and disappeared into his study for 15 minutes. Or how when he returned, Elena looked slightly less confident than before. Cracks, small ones, but visible if you knew where to look. Marcus. I turned to find a man in his 60s. Expensive suit. The kind of weathered handsomeness that suggested yacht clubs and golf courses. He extended his hand. Robert Ashford, Victoria's father. Ah, the Hotel Dynasty patriarch. Victoria had mentioned him in passing. Old money, old values. Deeply disappointed that his daughter had given up her career. Marcus Bennett, sir, pleasure to meet you. You're the architect Victoria's been spending time with. It wasn't a question. We've been to a few gallery openings together. Yes. Robert studied me with shrewd eyes that suggested he'd built his fortune by being underestimated. My daughter seems happier lately. More like herself. I don't suppose you have anything to do with that? I hope so, sir. She's been generous enough to share her knowledge of the art world. It's been illuminating. Has it? He glanced across the room to where Victoria was talking with a museum director. She was brilliant, you know, as a curator. Had a real eye. Could have been one of the greats if she'd stayed with it. She still could be perhaps. He turned back to me. Daniel's having an affair with someone here tonight. Probably multiple someones. I assume you know that. The directness surprised me. I had suspected. And you're still here at his party shaking his hand and drinking his champagne. I believe in understanding the terrain before making any moves. Rushing and angry would be satisfying for about 5 minutes, but building something strategic, something that lasts, that requires patience. Robert smiled. You know, I think I like you, Marcus. My daughter could use someone who thinks strategically. He glanced at his watch. I'm too old for these things. Tell Victoria I said goodbye and that I'd like to have dinner with both of you next week. I want to hear more about these gallery openings you've been attending. He left before I could respond, and I watched him make his way to the elevator. An ally potentially, or at least someone who wouldn't stand in the way if Victoria decided to blow up her marriage. Making friends. I turned to find Victoria beside me. 2 fresh glasses of champagne in her hands. She offered me one. Your father is interesting. He's direct. Think subtlety is for people who aren't confident in their positions. She sipped her champagne. What did he say? That he wants to have dinner with us next week. And that you were brilliant as a curator. Her expression softened. He never wanted me to marry Daniel. Told me I was trading my future for financial security. I thought he was being old-fashioned, that he didn't understand modern relationships. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out he understood perfectly. It's not too late, to go back to curation, isn't it? I've been out of the field for 12 years. The art world moves fast. I'm probably obsolete. Or you're experienced, mature, you have connections and knowledge that younger curators don't. You just need to remember how to use them. Before she could respond, a commotion near the center of the room drew our attention. Daniel's voice raised slightly above the conversational hum. Absolutely not. I've told you before that project isn't happening. We moved closer. Daniel stood facing Elena, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. Around them, other guests had gone quiet, pretending not to listen while straining to hear every word. I'm just saying, Elena said, her voice measured but with an edge underneath, that the market research supports expansion into Southeast Asia. If we wait another quarter, I don't pay you to question my decisions, Elena. I pay you to execute them. Daniel's smile was sharp. Or have you forgotten what your actual role is? The condescension in his voice was breathtaking. This was how he spoke to her. Not as a partner, not even as a valued employee, but as someone whose primary function was to agree with him and look good doing it. Elena's face flushed around them. I could see people exchanging glances. This wasn't professional disagreement. This was something more personal, meaner. Of course, Elena said finally, her voice tight. I apologize for overstepping. Good. Daniel's hand went to her waist, possessive and dismissive at the same time. Now smile. People are watching. She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Victoria and I exchanged a look. This was the man Elena had destroyed our marriage for. This was the relationship she thought was worth blowing up 7 years of shared history. I need air, Victoria said quietly. Come with me. We made our way to a terrace empty in the December cold, overlooking the city lights. Victoria leaned against the railing and I watched her shoulders shake. Victoria, I'm not crying, she said. I'm laughing. Did you see that? Did you see how he spoke to her? I saw. That's what she left you for. That's what I gave up my career for. Men who see us as accessories, as props in their perfect lives. She turned to me and her eyes were bright, but not with tears, with anger. I want him to hurt Marcus, not just lose me. I want him to actually feel something for once. Even if it's just the humiliation of being left, I understood. The rage underneath her calm, the need for him to understand what he'd thrown away. Then let's make sure he does, I said. But carefully, strategically, we build the foundations first. We make sure when we walk away, we're walking towards something better, not just away from something bad. How long? However long it takes, weeks, months, we do this, right? She nodded. I can wait. I've been waiting 12 years. What's a few more months? Through the glass doors, we could see the party continuing. Daniel holding court. Elena at his side with that brittle smile. All of them playing their roles, maintaining appearances, pretending everything was perfect. We should go back in, Victoria said. Can't have people thinking we're hiding. One more minute. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the view. The city sprawling below us, lights spreading in every direction. I want to remember this moment when we decided to stop being victims. Victoria moved beside me and I took another photo. Both of us, the city behind us, something determined in our expressions that hadn't been there before. Send me that, she said. I will. We went back inside. The party had shifted. People were starting to leave. The energy winding down. Daniel was saying goodbye to a group of investors. Elena still attached to his side. As we approached to say our goodbyes, Daniel turned to us. Leaving already? I have an early morning, I said. Thank you for having me. Beautiful home. Marcus is designing a house for a couple in Connecticut, Victoria added. Custom work, very innovative use of light and space. Sounds fascinating, Daniel said in a tone that suggested the opposite. His attention had already moved past me to someone else. Victoria, don't forget about the Grayson Gala. I won't. Elena caught my eye as we turned to leave. Her expression was complicated fear, confusion, something that might have been plea. I smiled at her, friendly and empty. Nice to see you again, Elena. Enjoy your evening. In the elevator going down, Victoria took my hand. That was harder than I expected, she said. Which part? All of it. Seeing him with her, watching him be cruel to her, and knowing I used to make excuses for that behavior, pretending everything was fine when I wanted to scream. But you didn't scream. You were perfect, controlled, exactly what we needed. What happens now? Now we build. You start planning your pop-up exhibition. I keep designing houses for people who actually love each other. We become more ourselves and less the people they needed us to be. And slowly, carefully, we make them irrelevant to our happiness. And then we walk away and never look back. The elevator opened onto the lobby. We stepped out into the cold December night, and I felt something like freedom settling over me. We'd entered the lion's den. We'd smiled and played our roles and laid the groundwork for everything that would come next. And we'd walked out unscathed, stronger than when we went in. The game was accelerating, and we were winning. The days after the party felt electric, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. I went through the motions of my normal life: meetings with clients, site visits, revisions to the Connecticut house design, but underneath it all, I felt like I was vibrating at a different frequency. Elena called 3 times the day after the party. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that progressed from confused to angry to something approaching desperate. "Marcus, what the hell were you doing at Daniel's party? Call me back. This is ridiculous. I know you're getting these messages. We need to talk. Please, just please call me. I need to understand what's happening." I deleted each one without responding. Let her wonder. Let her spiral. Let her feel a fraction of the uncertainty she'd put me through. Victoria texted that afternoon. "Elena's been trying to reach me. 5 calls so far. Should I answer?" I replied, "Your choice. But if you do, tell her the truth." We met at a gallery opening and became friends. Nothing more, nothing less. Nothing more. I stared at those 2 words for a long time before responding. "Not yet. But we're building towards something, aren't we?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, yes, we are. That evening, I was in my home office working on the Connecticut design when my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera and saw Elena standing on my porch, arms wrapped around herself against the December cold. I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. When I opened the door, she pushed past me without invitation. "We need to talk. Hello to you, too." She spun to face me, and I saw that the polished woman from the party had been replaced by someone fraying at the edges. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of her usual designer armor. And there were circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept well. "What were you doing at Daniel's party? Attending a party? Is that not allowed? Don't play games, Marcus. You know what I mean? How do you even know Victoria Whitmore? We met at an art gallery. Discovered we have similar interests. Started attending exhibitions together." I closed the door and leaned against it. "Is that a problem?" "Yes, it's a problem. She's Daniel's wife and you're Daniel's mistress. Seems like we're all connected now, doesn't it?" Elena's face went white then red. "How long have you known about your affair?" "Since 3 weeks before you had the courage to actually tell me. I came home early from Boston, remember? Found your laptop open with messages from Dee describing in detail how you tasted." She sat down heavily on the couch, our couch, soon to be my couch. "According to the mediation agreement, Jesus Marcus, I save it. I'm not interested in apologies or explanations. What I am interested in is why you're here freaking out about me being friends with Victoria. Because it's weird. It's calculated. You're doing something." I almost laughed. "You mean the way you calculated your affair? The way you scheduled hotel rooms and deleted messages and lied to my face for 4 months? That's different." "How?" "Because she stopped, realizing there was no good answer. Daniel's going to be furious if he finds out you're my husband. Almost ex-husband. And why would he be furious? I thought I was the understanding spouse who didn't matter anymore. You're being deliberately difficult. I'm being honest. Something you might try sometime." I moved to the bar cart and poured myself a scotch. Didn't offer her one. "Tell me something. Elena, does Daniel know you're here? That you're at your husband's house alone at night? I don't have to tell him everything." "Interesting. Does he know you still have keys to this house? That legally half of it's still yours for another 60 days? Her eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" "Nothing. Just noting that you seem very concerned about Daniel finding out I exist, but not at all concerned about him knowing you're here, which suggests you haven't told him who I am. He knows I was married. He doesn't need to know the details like my name or that I'm friends with his wife." I sat down across from her. "Let me guess. He thinks you were married to someone boring and inconsequential. Someone you left because he couldn't keep up with your ambition. And you've let him think that because the truth that you're still legally married, that your husband is friendly with his wife, that makes things complicated. Stop it." "Stop what?" "Telling the truth. You spent months lying to me, Elena." I'm just returning the favor by being aggressively honest. She stood up, pacing. Victoria Whitmore is not your friend. You're using her to get to Daniel. Am I? Or maybe Victoria and I are two people who were betrayed by our spouses and found comfort and shared experience. Maybe we actually like each other. Maybe not everything is a scheme. I don't believe you. I don't care. I finished my scotch. Is there anything else? Because I have work to do. Elena stared at me and I saw something like recognition in her eyes. You really have changed. The Marcus I married would never be this cold. The Marcus you married was a fool who didn't see. His wife was unhappy. Who accommodated and compromised and made himself smaller so you could shine brighter. That Marcus is gone. Elena, I killed him the night you asked for a divorce. And what are you now? Someone who builds his own life instead of supporting someone else's. Someone who doesn't apologize for taking up space. Someone who's done being invisible. She moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I never meant to hurt you, but you did it anyway. Which tells me everything I need to know about what I was worth to you. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her drive away. My phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Daniel just asked me about you, who you were, how we met, what you do. I told him the truth. He seemed satisfied but suspicious. I replied, good. Let him be suspicious. Let him wonder. It'll make him sloppy. Are you trying to make him jealous? I thought about that. Was I? Did I want Daniel Whitmore to see me as a threat? No. I'm trying to make him uncertain. There's a difference. Jealousy is emotional and predictable. Uncertainty is destabilizing. It makes people make mistakes. Victoria's response came quickly. You're scary when you're strategic. Is that a bad thing? No, it's exactly what I need right now. The following week, I met with Robert Ashford at his club, one of those old money institutions in Midtown, where the leather smelled like cigars and inherited privilege. He was waiting in a private dining room, reading the Wall Street Journal with the kind of attention that suggested he was evaluating investments. Marcus, he said, standing to shake my hand. Thank you for coming. I hope you don't mind. I thought it would be easier to talk without Victoria present. She can join us for dessert. Of course, sir. We ordered him the filt, me the salmon, and for the first few minutes, we made small talk about architecture and real estate. The kind of conversation men like Robert used to assess whether you knew what you were talking about. Then over the main course, he got to the point. My daughter is planning to leave Daniel. I kept my expression neutral. She mentioned she was unhappy. Unhappy doesn't cover it. She's been dying slowly for 12 years, and I had to watch it happen. He cut his steak with precise movements. I told her not to marry him. Told her she was giving up too much. But she was in love or thought she was. And young people think love conquers all. It doesn't. No sir, it doesn't. She trusts you. I can see it in the way she talks about you. And my daughter doesn't trust easily, especially not after what Daniel's put her through. He looked at me directly. So, I need to know your intentions. The question was so old-fashioned, so patriarchal that I almost laughed. But Robert Ashford was serious, and more importantly, he was a man who could either help or hinder what Victoria and I were building. My intentions are to help her remember who she was before she became Mrs. Daniel Whitmore. To support her in reclaiming her career, her identity, her life, to be someone who actually sees her instead of what she can do for me. And when the divorce gets ugly, which it will, what then? Then I stand beside her, help her navigate it, make sure she doesn't compromise on what she deserves just to make it end faster. Robert studied me. You're going through your own divorce. Was yes, sir. Does Victoria know your wife is the woman Daniel's currently sleeping with? The question landed like a punch. I sat down my fork carefully. How did you? I have resources. When my daughter started spending time with a recently separated architect, I looked into you. Found out your wife works at Whitmore Industries. Put the pieces together. He sipped his wine. Does Victoria know? Yes. We've been honest with each other about everything, and you're not using her to get revenge on your wife and Daniel? The accusation hung between us. I could lie, tell him this was purely about helping Victoria, but he'd see through it. And more importantly, Victoria deserved better than me lying to her father. Not entirely, I said. Initially, yes. When I first met Victoria, part of me saw an opportunity for symmetry. Elena took Daniel. I could take Victoria. It was strategic and petty and exactly the kind of thing someone in pain does. I met his eyes, but that's not what this is anymore. Victoria is brilliant and kind and deserves better than being a pawn in anyone's game, mine included. What we're building now is genuine. It's messy and complicated and probably inadvisable, but it's real. Robert nodded slowly. I appreciate the honesty and the self-awareness. Does that mean I have your approval, sir? It means I'm not going to stand in your way. But Marcus, if you hurt my daughter, if you use her and discard her the way Daniel has, you'll find out exactly how much damage a man with my resources can do. Understood, sir. Good. He signaled for the waiter. Now, tell me about this pop-up exhibition she's planning. She won't give me details, says she wants to surprise me. I spent the next hour telling Robert about Victoria's plans, the artist she was considering, a young woman from the Bronx who did mixed media installations, exploring themes of displacement and memory, the space she'd found, a former gallery in Chelsea that was between tenants. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about it, how she became more herself with every decision she made. She's coming back to life, Robert said quietly. I haven't seen her this animated in years. She's remembering who she is, what she's capable of. Thanks to you, thanks to her. I'm just making space for it to happen. Victoria arrived as we were finishing coffee. She looked between us, trying to read the room. Should I be worried that you two had dinner without me? Your father was just threatening to destroy me if I hurt you. I said, standard father-daughter protocol. Robert laughed. I like him, Vicky. He's honest. Bit too clever for his own good, but honest. We spent another hour together, the three of us, and I watched Victoria interact with her father. The way she softened around him, let her guard down. The way he looked at her with a mixture of pride and regret. Pride in who she was. Regret that she'd wasted so many years on someone who didn't deserve her. When we left the club, Victoria linked her arm through mine. He likes you. He threatened to ruin me. That's how he shows affection. She smiled. What did you two really talk about? You, your exhibition, whether my intentions are honorable. Are they? I stopped walking and turned to face her. We were standing on a sidewalk in Midtown, people streaming around us. The city alive with its usual chaos. My intentions are to see where this goes without lying about what it is. To build something real with you, while also acknowledging that we're both still healing from what our spouses did to us. To be honest about the fact that revenge and connection are tangled up together. And maybe that's okay. Victoria's eyes searched mine. That's a very careful answer. It's an honest one. Good. She stood on her toes and kissed my cheek. Honesty is all I need. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Daniel Whitmore. We should talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. my office. Come alone. I showed it to Victoria. Her face went pale. He knows. He suspects there's a difference. What are you going to do? I stared at the message, feeling something like anticipation settle in my chest. I'm going to go talk to him. See what he wants. Find out what he thinks he knows. Marcus, that's dangerous. If he knows about us, there is no us to know about. We're friends. We attend art galleries together. That's not a crime. He'll try to intimidate you. That's what he does. He'll use his power, his resources. Let him try. I put my phone away. I'm done being intimidated. Victoria, by anyone. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but call me afterward and be careful always. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, in my house, in my life that was slowly becoming mine again, and thought about Daniel Whitmore, about what he might know, what he might want, how he might try to use this meeting to reassert control. He thought I was a threat. That much was clear. But a threat to what? His marriage, his affair with Elena, his carefully constructed image, or maybe he just didn't like the idea of his wife having her own life, her own interests, her own friend who wasn't vetted and approved by him. Either way, tomorrow I would walk into his office, his territory, his domain, and I would smile and be perfectly reasonable and show him that I wasn't afraid because I wasn't. Not anymore. Elena had taken my trust and shattered it. Daniel had taken my wife and turned her into his accessory. They both thought I would crumble, that I would be the victim in their story of self-actualization and forbidden romance. But I'd rebuilt myself, found Victoria in the wreckage, started constructing something new from the broken pieces. And tomorrow, I would look Daniel Whitmore in the eye and let him see exactly who he was dealing with. Not a victim. Not someone who could be intimidated or controlled. Someone who'd learned to build with the rubble of what had been destroyed. Someone who was done playing by their rules. I fell asleep with that thought and I dreamed of buildings rising from foundations made of truth and consequence. Tomorrow the architecture of revenge would take its next form. And I was ready. Whitmore Industries occupied 15 floors in a glass tower in Hudson Yards. The kind of building that looked like it was designed by someone who'd never met a hard angle they didn't want to make harder. All steel and glass and aggressive modernity. A monument to the future as imagined by people who'd gotten very rich betting on it. I arrived at 1:55 p.m. dressed in my best suit, charcoal gray, Italian wool, expensive, but not ostentatious. The kind of thing that said I belonged in rooms like this without trying to compete with people who had more zeros in their bank accounts. The lobby was minimalist to the point of hostility. White marble, chrome fixtures, a reception desk that looked like a spaceship's command center. A young woman with perfect posture and a tablet smiled at me with practiced efficiency. Marcus Bennett for Daniel Whitmore. She tapped her screen. Of course, Mr. Bennett, please take the elevator to the 14th floor. Someone will meet you there. The elevator was all mirrors like Daniel's penthouse elevator. And I wondered if this was intentional, making visitors look at themselves, evaluate themselves, feel small before they even reached his office. I looked at my reflection and saw someone who'd lost weight, gained edges, developed a kind of hardness around the eyes that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. Grief and anger had carved something leaner out of me. Something that looked like it could survive what was coming. The 14th floor opened onto a reception area that screamed wealth and power. More glass, more chrome. Panoramic views of the Hudson River. A different assistant, this one male, maybe 25, stood waiting. Mr. Bennett, please follow me. We walked down a hallway lined with photographs of Daniel shaking hands with tech luminaries and politicians, accepting awards, speaking at conferences. A shrine to his own importance. The assistant opened a door at the end of the hall. Mr. Whitmore, we'll be right with you. I stepped into an office that was less a workspace and more a statement of dominance. Corner office, Florida to ceiling windows on 2 walls. A desk the size of a small car made from some exotic wood I couldn't identify. Behind it, Manhattan spread out like a kingdom Daniel owned. I didn't sit in either of the chairs positioned in front of the desk. The lower chairs I noticed designed to make visitors look up at whoever sat behind the desk. Instead, I stood at the windows looking out at the city and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. A power play, making me wait, establishing that this was his territory, his time, his control. At 15 minutes, the door opened. Daniel Whitmore entered like a man who owned not just the room, but the air in it. He'd changed from the party. Now he wore a suit that probably cost more than my car, no tie, that studied casualness, that actually required more thought than formality. He looked like every magazine spread about successful CEOs right down to the watch that could fund a small country's GDP. Marcus, he said, not apologizing for being late. Thank you for coming. I was curious about what you wanted to discuss. He moved behind his desk, but didn't sit. Another power play standing while I stood, but from behind the fortress of his workspace. I'll be direct. What's your relationship with my wife? We're friends. Friends? He said it like the word tasted wrong. How did you meet? At a gallery opening, we discovered shared interests in art and architecture. Started attending exhibitions together. And that's all. What else would it be? Daniel's eyes narrowed. I did some research on you after the party. Found out you're an architect, like you said. Small firm, residential work. Nothing particularly notable. Also found out you're going through a divorce. That's hardly a secret. Divorce records are public. What's interesting is that your wife works for me. Elena Martinez, VP of Brand Strategy. He watched my face carefully. Small world, isn't it? I kept my expression neutral. Interested but not defensive. Is it? There are thousands of people in New York. Coincidences happen. Do they? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you befriended my wife to get back at yours. Some kind of petty revenge scheme. That's an interesting theory. Requires me to have known Victoria before I knew about Elena's affair, which I didn't. Also requires me to have somehow engineered meeting her at a random gallery opening, which would be impossible without supernatural foresight. I moved away from the window closer to his desk. Or maybe Victoria and I are just two people who were both betrayed and found common ground. Maybe not everything is a conspiracy. I don't believe in coincidences. Then you must live in a very paranoid world. His jaw tightened. Point to me. I want you to stop seeing her. Excuse me, Victoria. I want you to stop attending gallery openings with her. Stop these little coffee dates or whatever you're doing. End the friendship. I almost laughed. You're asking me to stop being friends with your wife? I'm not asking. No. What are you doing then? Threatening because I'm curious what leverage you think you have over me, Mr. Whitmore. I don't work for you. I don't need anything from you. And last I checked, your wife is an adult woman capable of choosing her own friends. Everyone needs something, Marcus. Everyone has pressure points. He opened a folder on his desk. You have a firm, small, like I said, but it's yours. You've got 3 projects in development right now. One's with a developer who happens to use my company's software for project management. Another's with a couple whose husband works in finance. I know people in that world. Word gets around about architects who are difficult to work with, who miss deadlines, who create problems. Are you threatening my business? I'm pointing out that New York is a small town in a lot of ways. Reputations matter. And if someone wanted to make life difficult for a small architectural firm, it wouldn't be hard. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw what Victoria had been living with for 12 years. A man who wielded power like a weapon. Who couldn't imagine a world where people didn't bend to his will, who thought money and influence could control everything, including his wife's friendships. Let me tell you what I see, Daniel, I said, keeping my voice calm. I see a man who's so insecure about his wife having her own life that he threatens her friends. A man who's having multiple affairs, but can't stand the idea of his wife talking to another man. A man who's built his entire sense of self on control. And now he's panicking because something's slipping through his fingers. His face went red. You have no idea what you're talking about, don't I? I know you're sleeping with my wife. I know you've been sleeping with her for months. While pretending to be a devoted husband, I know Victoria is aware of it. All of it. Not just Elena. All the others, too. And she's finally done pretending she doesn't see it. You're lying. Am I? Ask her. Ask Victoria if she knows about Elena. About the consultant from Singapore? About the junior associate you've been mentoring in ways that have nothing to do with professional development. I leaned forward, hands on his desk. She hired a private investigator, Daniel. She has documentation, photographs, hotel receipts, everything she needs for a divorce that will make you look exactly like what you are. The color drained from his face. She wouldn't. Why? Because she's been so accommodating for 12 years that you think she always will be. Because you've convinced yourself she's too dependent on your money and status to leave. I smiled. Men like you always make the same mistake. You think submission is the same as loyalty. It's not. Submission is just fear with good manners. Get out of my office. Gladly. But understand something. I'm not going to stop being Victoria's friend because you're uncomfortable with it. She's reclaiming her life, building a career again, remembering who she was before she made the mistake of marrying you. And I'm going to support that. Not because I'm trying to hurt you, but because she deserves to be more than Mrs. Daniel Whitmore. If you think you can take my wife, I don't want to take anything from you, Daniel. I want to get Victoria back to herself. There's a difference. I moved toward the door. But here's something to think about. Elena left me for you because she thought you represented power and success and everything she wanted. But she's realizing the same thing. Victoria realized that you don't actually care about the women in your life. You care about how they make you look. And eventually that stops being enough. I opened the door and found Elena standing in the hallway, hand raised like she'd been about to knock. Her eyes went wide. Marcus, what are you? Elena? I nodded to her like she was a stranger. I was just leaving. Daniel's all yours. I walked past her without another word. Down the hallway lined with Daniel's achievements. Past the assistant, who carefully didn't make eye contact, into the elevator where my reflection stared back at me, looking satisfied and slightly dangerous. My phone buzzed before I reached the lobby. Victoria, are you okay? What happened? I stepped out onto the street and called her. Marcus, tell me everything. I just had a very illuminating conversation with your husband. He knows about us, or at least suspects. Tried to threaten my business if I didn't stop seeing you. Oh my God, Marcus, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to. Victoria, stop. This isn't your fault. And frankly, it was worth it to see his face when I told him you knew about all his affairs and had hired a pie. Silence. Then you told him that. Was I not supposed to? No, I hadn't planned to tell him I knew. Not yet. I wanted to build my exhibition first, get my career restarted. So when I left, I'd be leaving towards something instead of away from something. I stopped walking. Victoria. I'm sorry. I got caught up in the moment in putting him off balance. I should have asked you first. It's okay. Actually, it's probably better this way. Now he knows I'm not the accommodating wife anymore. That I have evidence if he tries to make the divorce difficult. She paused. What did Elena say? Nothing. I left before they could talk. But she saw me leaving his office, so she knows I know. Knows. We both know this is getting complicated. It was always going to get complicated. We just accelerated the timeline. Where are you now? Standing on the corner of 10th Avenue and 33rd, watching tourists and wondering if I just made everything worse. Come to my studio. I'm at the Chelsea space working on the exhibition layout. We should talk about this in person. Your studio? You have a studio now? As of 3 days ago? Signed a 6-month lease on the gallery space. I haven't told Daniel yet or anyone except my father. Her voice softened. I'd like you to see it. 20 minutes later, I stood in front of a former gallery space in Chelsea, a ground floor unit with good light and high ceilings. Through the windows, I could see Victoria inside, measuring wall space with a laser measure, her hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a paint-stained shirt I'd never seen before. She looked like herself, not the society wife in designer dresses, the curator, the artist, the woman she'd been before Daniel Whitmore convinced her to be smaller. I knocked and she let me in. The space smelled like fresh paint and possibility. What do you think? She asked, gesturing around. The gallery was maybe 1,500 square feet, all white walls and blonde wood floors, track lighting that could be adjusted for different installations. Empty now, but I could see what it would become. It's perfect. When's the opening? 6 weeks. February 14th, actually. I thought there was something poetic about opening an exhibition about displacement and memory on Valentine's Day. Very poetic and very you. She walked to the center of the space, turning slowly. I forgot how good this feels, having a project that's mine, building something instead of just funding other people's visions. Tell me about the artist. For the next hour, Victoria talked and I listened. She showed me sketches of the installation pieces, explained the themes, walked me through her vision for how viewers would move through the space. She was animated, passionate, completely alive. This was the woman Daniel had tried to bury, the one Elena and I had inadvertently helped resurrect. I'm going to tell him tonight, Victoria said finally. About the studio, about the exhibition, about wanting a divorce. Are you sure? You don't have to accelerate because of what I said. It's not because of you. It's because I'm done waiting for the perfect moment. There is no perfect moment. There's just now and I'm ready. What do you need from me? Be available tonight. In case I need to talk after or in case it goes badly and I need somewhere to go. Of course. Whatever you need. She moved closer and I could smell turpentine and perfume. Work and elegance mixed together. Thank you for this, for seeing me, for giving me permission to be myself again. You never needed my permission. Victoria, maybe not, but it helped having someone believe I could do it. We stood there in her empty gallery, and I felt the weight of what we were building. Not just a friendship, not just revenge, something more complicated and honest than either of those things. My phone rang. Jeremy Morrison, I should take this, I said. Go ahead. I need to finish measurements anyway. I answered. Jeremy, Marcus, we have a problem. Elena's lawyer just filed an emergency motion claiming you're harassing her client and demanding supervised mediation. What? That's insane. I haven't contacted Elena at all. According to the motion, you showed up at her workplace today and had a confrontational interaction that left her feeling threatened. I closed my eyes. Daniel's office. Elena in the hallway. This was Daniel's doing. Using Elena's lawyers to create leverage to punish me for not backing down. Jeremy, I was there to meet with her boss about an unrelated matter. I barely spoke to her. Can you prove that? The boss can Daniel Whitmore, though I doubt he'll volunteer to help me. This is getting messy, Marcus. I know, but I'm not backing down. After I hung up, Victoria was watching me. Trouble? Elena's lawyers claiming I'm harassing her. Daniel's trying to create leverage because you won't stay away from me. Exactly. She came and took my hand. Is this worth it? Fighting him, dealing with all this drama. I looked at her, at this woman who was rebuilding herself, who was brave enough to reclaim her life, even though it meant war with a man who had more money and power than both of us combined. And I knew the answer. Yes. Absolutely yes. Even if it costs you. Especially if it costs me. Because that means I'm building something that matters instead of protecting something that's already dead. Victoria smiled. Okay, then let's burn it all down and build something better in the ashes. Poetic. I'm a curator. Poetry is in the job description. That night, I waited by my phone. Victoria texted at 9 p.m. told him everything. He's furious. Threatened to destroy the exhibition, cut me off financially, ruin my reputation. I told him to do his worst. Currently at my father's penthouse. Feel strangely calm, I replied. Proud of you. That took courage or madness. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Either way, you did it. You're free. Not yet. But I'm getting there. I sat in my house, my empty, soon to be actually mine house, and felt something like hope. Victoria was free or getting there. I was free. Legally divorced in another 60 days. And Daniel and Elena were probably in his penthouse right now, trying to figure out how their perfect affair had suddenly become very complicated. The game had changed. The stakes were higher, but I was ready. We were both ready. The emergency mediation session was scheduled for 3 days after Victoria told Daniel she wanted a divorce. I sat in the same gray conference room where we divided our assets the first time, but the atmosphere was different now. Charged, hostile. Elena sat across from me with Patricia Winters, and for the first time since this all began, she looked uncertain. Not the confident VP who'd asked for a divorce over Ricedo. Not the woman who draped herself on Daniel's arm at his party. She looked rattled. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Susan Chen said, her mediator voice carefully neutral. Miss Winters has raised concerns about interactions between the parties that she feels constitute harassment. "Mr. Bennett, would you like to respond?" "I haven't harassed anyone," I said calmly. "I attended a party where my wife happened to be present. I had a business meeting at her employer's office. Neither of those constitutes harassment." Patricia leaned forward. "You befriended Mr. Whitmore's wife and brought her to a company party knowing your own wife would be there. That's calculated and inappropriate. I brought a friend to a party. My relationship with Victoria Whitmore has nothing to do with Elena, doesn't it?" Patricia's tone was sharp. "You targeted Daniel Whitmore's wife as revenge for your wife's relationship with Mr. Whitmore." Jeremy cut in. "That's speculation and irrelevant to these proceedings. Mr. Bennett is entitled to have friends. The fact that his friend happens to be married to Miss Martinez's employer is coincidental." "Is it?" Elena spoke for the first time, her voice tight. "Marcus, you expect me to believe you just randomly became friends with Daniel's wife? After everything, I met her eyes. I expect you to recognize that you don't get to control who I spend time with. You made your choices, Elena. I'm making mine by trying to ruin my relationship. Your relationship with a married man who's been having multiple simultaneous affairs. That relationship." I kept my voice level. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. Reality is doing that all on its own." Elena's face flushed. "You told him. You told Daniel that Victoria knows about the affairs." "I told him the truth. Something you might try sometime." "That's enough," Susan said. "Let's focus on the actual legal issues. Miss Winters, do you have specific instances of harassment to report?" Patricia consulted her notes. "Mr. Bennett showed up at Whitmore Industries on the 14th and had a confrontational meeting with Mr. Whitmore that left Miss Martinez feeling unsafe in her workplace. I was invited to that meeting. I said, Daniel Whitmore called and asked me to come to his office. I didn't initiate contact and I didn't speak to Elena except to say hello when I left." "Is this true?" Susan asked. Patricia looked to Elena, who shifted uncomfortably. "Daniel said he wanted to talk to Marcus about his relationship with Victoria. So, Mr. Bennett was invited to this meeting by Mr. Whitmore, not harassing anyone." Susan made a note. "What else?" "There's the matter of Mr. Bennett using his relationship with Mrs. Whitmore to gain information about Miss Martinez's personal life and employment." Jeremy almost laughed. "Are you seriously suggesting that two people who've both been cheated on can't discuss their situations? That's absurd. It's strategic and manipulative. It's friendship and mutual support." The mediation devolved from their accusations and counter-accusations, legal posturing, and barely contained hostility. By the time we broke for lunch, nothing had been resolved except that everyone was angry and the divorce had officially become ugly. Elena caught me in the hallway. "Can we talk privately?" I looked at Jeremy, who nodded. "5 minutes, I'll be in the lobby." We found an empty conference room. Elena closed the door and leaned against it. And I saw that under the anger, she was afraid. "This is getting out of control," she said. "You're the one who filed harassment claims. That was Patricia's idea. And Daniel's. They said we needed to establish boundaries. To protect," she trailed off. "To protect what?" "Daniel's reputation, his marriage, both of which are already on fire because of his own actions. He's furious at you. At Victoria, at me for bringing you into his life. You brought me into his life. Elena, you're the one who started sleeping with him. I'm just a consequence you didn't plan for." She moved away from the door. Pacing. "Victoria's filing for divorce. Did you know that?" "Yes. And you encouraged her." "I supported her decision to stop living a lie." "There's a difference. Daniel says she's trying to ruin him. That she timed this to cause maximum damage to his reputation. That she's going to take half of everything and destroy the company." I almost laughed. "Daniel has $200 million. She's entitled to half of what they built together over 12 years. That's not ruining him. That's basic contract law. He's talking about contesting the prenup. Says she violated the fidelity clause by being friends with me. Good luck proving that." Elena stopped pacing and looked at me directly. Are you sleeping with her? That's none of your business. So you are. I didn't say that. I said it's none of your business. You gave up the right to know about my personal life when you started your boss. She flinched. I know you're angry. I'm not angry, Elena. I'm done. There's a difference. Anger requires me to still care about what you do, who you're with, whether you're happy. I don't. You're just the woman I used to be married to, who made choices that ended our relationship. That's all. Then why are you doing this? Why befriend Victoria? Why show up at Daniel's party? Why any of it if you don't care? Because I deserve to build a life that's mine. Because Victoria deserves to remember who she is. Because your affair doesn't get to define my next chapter. I do. I move toward the door. And because maybe, just maybe, you and Daniel need to understand that actions have consequences. That you can't just take what you want and expect everyone else to accommodate it. Marcus, wait. Her voice cracked. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did it anyway. Which tells me everything I need to know about what I meant to you. I left her in the conference room and found Jeremy in the lobby. We're done here. Tell Susan we'll review whatever agreement they propose, but I'm not sitting through any more accusations. Agreed. Though, Marcus, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. If Daniel Whitmore is involved, let it get ugly. I'm not backing down. That evening, I met Victoria at a wine bar in the West Village, somewhere dark and anonymous, where we could talk without being seen. She was already there when I arrived, halfway through a glass of red that looked like it cost more than the bottle. Rough day? I asked, sliding into the booth across from her. Daniel's lawyer sent a letter to the gallery owner, suggested that my exhibition might be funded with marital assets and therefore should be postponed until the divorce is settled. She took a drink. My father's lawyers responded within an hour, pointing out that the gallery lease is in my name, funded by my trust fund that predates the marriage, but it rattled the owner. She's nervous about being caught in the middle. Will she back out? No. My father made some calls, reminded her who my family is, what connections we have. She's committed. Victoria smiled without humor. Nothing like threatening someone's livelihood to secure their loyalty. That's not like you. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I've been too nice, too accommodating. Maybe it's time to use the resources I have instead of pretending I don't come from money. I studied her. She looked tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from constant vigilance rather than lack of sleep. Are you okay? Really? I don't know. I thought I'd feel liberated, free. Instead, I just feel exposed. Like I've been living in a gilded cage for so long that now that the door's open, I don't remember how to fly. You're remembering the exhibition, the studio, standing up to Daniel. That's all you're remembering. Is it? Or am I just trading one form of dependence for another? She looked at me. Be honest, Marcus. Am I using this whatever this is between us as a crutch to make leaving Daniel easier? The question landed heavy between us. I thought about it seriously because Victoria deserved serious answers. Maybe, I said, but I'm probably using you, too. Using our friendship as proof that I can build something new, that I'm more than just the husband Elena left. We're both broken people finding pieces of ourselves in each other. Is that using? Or is that just what connection looks like when you're healing? I don't know. Neither do I, but I know it feels real. And I know I care about you. Genuinely care in a way that has nothing to do with Daniel or Elena or revenge. Victoria reached across the table and took my hand. I care about you, too. That's what scares me. What if we're building something on a foundation of pain? What if when the divorce is over and the anger fades, we look at each other and realize we were just trauma bonding? Then we deal with that when it happens. But Victoria, I don't think that's what this is. I think we're two people who understand each other because we've been through the same betrayal. Yes, but we're also two people who genuinely like each other, who have real conversations, who support each other's growth. That sounds very healthy and mature. Are you disappointed? She laughed. No, just surprised. I expected revenge to feel more dramatic, more cinematic. Instead, it feels like therapy with better wine. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Victoria's number. Daniel has my phone. He's reading our messages. Be careful what you say. The best. I showed it to Victoria. Her eyes widened. He took my phone. When? Probably when you were asleep or in the shower sometime. He had access that manipulative. She stopped, took a breath. He's looking for evidence. Something to use against me in the divorce. Will he find anything in our texts? No. We've been careful. Friends discussing art and life. Nothing inappropriate. She paused. Though the subtext might be obvious to someone looking for it. Let him look. We haven't done anything wrong, haven't we, Marcus? We're planning to destroy our spouse's relationship. We're supporting each other through divorces that are at least partially motivated by revenge. That's not exactly innocent. It's not illegal either, and it's definitely not inappropriate compared to what they've been doing. Victoria pulled out a laptop from her bag. I hadn't noticed she'd brought it. I need to show you something. The pie I hired sent me the full report yesterday. She opened a folder of photographs, Daniel at hotels with different women, credit card receipts, calendar entries that didn't match his claimed locations. But what caught my attention was a series of emails between Daniel and Elena. Read this one, Victoria said, pointing to a message dated 3 weeks ago from Daniel Whitmore. 2. Elena Martinez. Subject: Concerns. Elena. Victoria suspects nothing. She's too absorbed in her charity work to notice I'm barely home. As for your husband, he's a non-issue small-time architect with no connections, no leverage. Even if he knew, what's he going to do? Stop worrying. Everything is under control.
D. I read it twice, feeling something cold settle in my chest.
Not hurt, I was past hurt, but anger. Not the hot, reactive kind. The cold, calculated kind that built plans. Non-issue, I said. Good to know what he thinks of me. There's more. Victoria clicked to another email from Elena Martinez to Daniel Whitmore. Subject: Concerns. I know you're right. It's just hard sometimes pretending. Marcus is being so reasonable about everything. And I feel guilty, like I should tell him the truth about us being serious, not just an affair. But you're right. Better to wait until my divorce is final. Less complicated. I love you. Victoria watched me read it. She loves him or thinks she does. She loves the idea of him. The power, the status, the upgrade from her boring architect husband. I closed the laptop. But Daniel doesn't love her. Look at how he talks about her. She's a concern to be managed, not a partner. They're using each other. Exactly. Elena thinks she's won some prize. Daniel thinks he's acquired a younger model. Neither of them sees the truth, which is that they're both fundamentally selfish people who mistake attraction for connection. They'll implode eventually. We don't even have to do anything. Victoria poured herself more wine. Then why does it still hurt? Why do I still care that my husband of 12 years refers to me as too absorbed in charity work to notice his affairs? Like I'm stupid, oblivious. Because you loved him once or loved who you thought he was. And it hurts to realize you were wrong about someone you trusted with your life. Did you love Elena? Really love her? I thought about it. I loved who she was when we met. Ambitious, brilliant, hungry for more than what she had. I loved being the person who supported that hunger. But did I love who she became? The woman who scheduled affairs in her calendar and deleted messages? I don't think so. I think I love the idea of our marriage more than I love the actual person she was. That's sad. It's honest. And maybe that's why this us, whatever this is, feels different. We're not in love with ideas. We're in love with truth. Victoria's hand tightened on mine. Are we in love? The question hung there. Dangerous and electric. Were we? Was this love or was it need? Healing or harm? Connection or convenient? I don't know. I said, but I know I care about you. I know I think about you constantly. I know I want you to succeed, to be happy, to remember who you are. If that's love, then yes. If it's something else, I'm okay with that, too. Marcus, my phone rang. Jeremy Morrison. I should take this. Go ahead, I answered. Jeremy, the divorce is final. Judge signed off this afternoon. You're legally unmarried as of 4:00 p.m. today. I looked at Victoria and something shifted in my chest. I'm divorced. Congratulations or condolences, whichever feels more appropriate. Jeremy paused. There's one more thing. Elena's lawyers filed a response to our settlement agreement. She's contesting the division of the Vermont property. Says she has stronger emotional attachment than initially claimed. Of course she is. Let her have it. I don't care about the property. You sure? It's worth close to $500,000. I'm sure. I want to be done. Jeremy, completely done. No strings, no shared assets, nothing that keeps me tied to her. Understood. I'll file the acceptance tomorrow. After I hung up, Victoria was watching me. You're free legally? Yes. How does it feel? Like standing at the edge of something. I could fall or I could fly. Not sure which yet. Victoria stood up and held out her hand. Let's find out. Where are we going? My studio. I want to show you the final layout for the exhibition. And I want to kiss you without wondering if we're crossing some line. My heart kicked. Victoria, we're both single now. Both free. Both building new lives. If we want to see where this goes, we can. No guilt, no betrayal, just us. I took her hand and stood. Just us. We left the wine bar and walked through the West Village. Two people who'd been broken by the same betrayal, finding each other in the wreckage. The night was cold, but I barely felt it. We were free, both of us. And whatever came next, love or healing, revenge or resurrection, we'd face it together. 3 months later, I stood in front of my mirror adjusting the same charcoal tie Elena had bought me, preparing for the moment I'd been building toward since that first bourbon with Victoria. Whitmore Industries Spring Gala, the company's biggest event of the year, and I was attending as Victoria Ashford's date, not Victoria Whitmore anymore. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago, brutal in public, with Daniel forced to write a check for $85 million and watch his carefully constructed image crumble in the business press. Victoria's exhibition had been a triumph. Critics called it a resurrection of curatorial vision and the return of a major voice in contemporary art. She'd been offered positions at 3 museums. She'd turned them all down to start her own independent curatorial practice. She was in every sense herself again. My phone buzzed. Victoria, ready? Almost. You wearing the red dress? Daniel hates it. I smiled. Perfect. We arrived together and I watched heads turn as we entered. Victoria in red, stunning and confident. Me in my suit. No longer invisible. No longer the accommodating husband who made himself small. Daniel stood in his usual spot, center of the room. But something had shifted. People weren't orbiting him the way they used to. The divorce had damaged him, not financially. He had money to spare, but reputationally. The affairs had gone public. The business press had questions about his judgment. And on his arm, looking less radiant than she had 3 months ago. Elena, she saw us first. I watched the recognition, the fear, the complicated mathematics of seeing your ex-husband with your ex-lover's ex-wife. Then Daniel turned. Our eyes met across the room. I took Victoria's hand and walked straight toward them. Daniel, Victoria said, her voice pleasant and cold. Elena, what a surprise, Victoria. Daniel's voice was tight. Marcus, congratulations on the gala, I said. Beautiful event. Elena looked between us, trying to find safe ground. You two look happy. We are, Victoria said simply. Marcus, let me introduce you to some people. We moved through the party and I felt Daniel's eyes following us. Victoria introduced me to board members and investors and I was charming and professional and completely unbothered because that was the revenge. Not destroying Daniel. He'd done that himself. Not winning Elena back. I didn't want her. The revenge was standing in his territory with his ex-wife on my arm. Proving that I'd built something better from the ashes of what he'd destroyed. Later, Victoria and I stood at the bar. Daniel approached alone. Victoria, he said. Can we talk? We have nothing to discuss. Please 5 minutes. She looked at me. I nodded. I'll be here. They moved to a corner and I watched Daniel try to salvage something pride maybe or control. Victoria's face remained impassive. When she returned, she was smiling. What did he say? I asked. That he made a mistake. That he wants to try again. That he realizes what he lost. She took my hand. I told him I didn't care. That I'd already found something real. Have you? She looked up at me. And in her eyes, I saw everything. We'd built. Friendship and healing, revenge and resurrection, truth and connection. Yes, she said. I think I have. I kissed her then. In Daniel Whitmore's company party in front of everyone who'd watched our marriages crumble and our lives rebuild. When we pulled apart, I saw Elena watching from across the room. Not angry, not jealous, just sad, like she was beginning to understand what she'd traded for power and status. Ready to leave? Victoria asked. Absolutely. We walked out together, leaving the party behind. As we reached the elevator, I turned back for one last look. Daniel stood alone in the center of his kingdom, surrounded by people, but utterly isolated. Elena beside him, looking like she'd won a prize that was already tarnishing. And I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just the quiet certainty of someone who'd built something better. The elevator doors closed and Victoria leaned against me. Thank you, she said. For what? For seeing me. For helping me remember who I was. For being real when everything else was performance. I kissed the top of her head. Thank you for the same. We rode down in silence. And when we stepped out into the spring night, I felt like we were stepping into our actual lives. Not the ones we'd performed for other people, the ones we'd built for ourselves. Where, to? Victoria asked. Anywhere, everywhere. Wherever we want, she smiled. I like the sound of that. We walked into the night together. Two people who'd been broken by betrayal and rebuilt by truth. Leaving the past behind and stepping into whatever came next. Not revenge, not anymore. Just life. Real messy, honest life. And it was beautiful.